Three, two, one.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
What? If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor.
What difference at this point does it make?
Doesn't make sense.
If you're looking to make sense out of what's going on in the world today, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, Annie, the radio chick Ubelis, and featuring Curtis C.S. Bennett and the most interesting guests that you'll find anywhere on Internet radio. And you can join the show and let your voice be heard by dialing 917-889-3675. So sit back, relax, and remember, Southern Sense is common sense.
When an emergency strikes, what's your first impulse? If your answer is run to the grocery store, you're likely to find chaos and plenty of empty shelves. So how do you avoid this? Well, it's simple. You use today to make a plan, to prepare for things that may happen. It's a hurricane, earthquake, blizzard, or even social unrest, especially in today's political environment. The practical place to start is by storing up food in your home. And I use My Patriot Supply for my food storage. If you don't have an emergency food supply, it's time to do so. Here's a great item that makes it really simple. A 2-week food kit that comes in a rugged tote. And it's only $75 when you go to my special website, preparewithsouthernsense.com, or call 888-441-7290. This food kit includes breakfast, lunch, and dinners that will last up to 25 years on your storage shelves. So order now and prepare yourself, and then rest easy. So it's very simple. Just call 888-441-7290 or go to preparewithsouthernsense.com. You know what? Let's make it even more simple than that. You're listening to my show, and it's called Southern Sense, and you know you put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com, and click on the icon for My Patriot Food.
All right, and you're here listening to another adventure with Annie screwing up the camera once again. Here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook. Oh, the heck with it. Go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. I'm your hostess with the mostest that's losing it once again, Annie, the radio chick, along with my oh-so-patient and wonderful co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett. Do you think I can ever start one of these shows without messing it up, Curtis? Just once.
Hey, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same.
Man, we got ourselves an exciting episode today. We're going to start off the show with Tana Gortz. She is on the Trump Advisory Board. She's also with Women for Trump. She'll be joining us. She also has her own amazing website called HeyTanya.com. So we'll be talking to her. We also have a United States Marine, retired, former NFL football star, Jeremy Statt, who is running for Congress out of California District 8. He'll be joining us at the 4 o'clock hour of the show. And then we're going to close off with an author. I think this is his fourth book out, called The Cauldron: Terror, Tension, and the American Ambassador's Struggle to Avoid Pearl Harbor. His name is Lou Paper. So we've got a lot to talk about. We've got the impeachment hearings going on. We got the USMCA has passed. That China has now agreed to additional phase 1 terms. Trump is steaming ahead. That Trump train is on the tracks, and get out of its way, folks. I don't think this impeachment's going to put a dent in its time schedule.
Not at all. Not at all. And then we got Iran. They want to show out every once in a while, but Trump put them in their place real quick in a hurry as the left went frantic. Oh, we're going to start World War III. Oh, God.
What I love also is that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, are going at each other now, tooth and nail, hammer and tongs. What fun! What fun to see these two go at it, because the more Warren and Sanders tear each other down, they'll go down in the ratings. Biden goes up. Biden becomes the nominee, and I'm telling you, Trump is going to stomp. He's going to crush him like an ant under the heel of his cowboy boot. So we got a lot to talk about.
He's going to be so dazed. He's going to be so dazed. He's going to think he was in the ring with Muhammad Ali.
It's going to be rope-a-dope.
Oh, yeah.
And all we need to see is Hunter Biden being called before the Senate impeachment hearing. It looks like it just may come to that, because if they're using the telephone conversation, citing the Biden family, Hunter as well as crazy Uncle Joe, it's a possibility, because this is evidence that had been put before Congress. So there is a slim possibility that Hunter Biden may be a witness. So they're building this entire impeachment around one phone call. And what really got me, and we're going to discuss this later on with our guest, is that when they presented the articles of impeachment on the floor, they did not cite them correctly on numerous occasions. You heard them say obstruction of justice. Yes, obstruction of justice is a crime, but he was charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. That is not a criminal offense. So this is going to get...
that's something they made up.
Yeah. And then Nancy Pelosi on the floor of the House misquoted what the dialogue was in that conversation between the Ukrainian Prime Minister and President Trump. She misquoted it the same way Adam Schiff made up completely falsified script when he did the articles of impeachment in the Foreign Relations Committee. So it's going to come and bite them back in the butt, I'm telling you, big time. Anyway, want to welcome everyone. Go ahead, Curtis.
Isn't it strange that the president, in his attempt to seek a remedy with the courts, that the Congress would say he's obstructing Congress? I mean, that's his legal right. That's constitutional what he's doing. The court is there to be kind of like a coach between the other two branches,
Yeah.
And they charging him obstruction of Congress because he went and did a legal, recourse with the courts. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. And it's going to get crazier and crazier and crazier. And the closer we get to the election date of November, Folks, be careful. Just be careful out there, because I have a funny feeling we're going to see a ramp up of violence from Black Lives Matter, from whatever George Soros, Antifa is going to be out there. You may see the Black Panthers once again at polling places. So please, please, I beg of you, be careful. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot to do. Those that listen to the show, first I want to welcome everyone that is listening in here up on Facebook, in the chat on Facebook. We got it up there live, as well as here on Blog Talk Radio, as well as on brain fart, SHR Media over on Spreaker. Want to say hi to everyone that's out there. Feel free to post your comments, questions, or whatever. But if you listen to the show, you know we start off each and every show to a fallen hero. And this dedication's a little special because the individual we're dedicating the show to happened to have been a friend, a personal friend of one of our guests, Jeremy Statt. And when I booked Jeremy and I was doing background research on him, I came across where the two of them crossed paths. And I thought, to honor our guest as well as to honor our fallen hero, today's dedication, that's if I can get through it, is going to go out to Patrick Daniel Tillman, who was killed by friendly fire in Afghanistan on April 22nd, 2004. He was an American professional football player in the National League who left his sports career and enlisted in the United States Army in June of 2002 in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. And so that I can do this properly, this was an article written by a fellow Army Ranger, Matt Gallagher, and it was posted in menshealth.com. It was posted on October 10th, 2018, and it is titled, The Enduring Legacy of Pat Tillman, NFL Star Turned Army Ranger. The man who can most truly be accounted brave is he who knows best the meaning of what is sweet in life and what is terrible, and then goes out undeterred to meet what is come. A couple millennia ago, and some change ago, a general named Pericles said these words. During a public funeral for a war dead, he implored his fellow citizens to remember the ideals and virtues of Athens. I have been revisiting Pericles a lot lately. His speeches feel vital to understanding 2018 America. And every time I come across those lines above, I think of Corporal Pat Tillman. Tillman, the professional football star turned enlisted Army Ranger, but also so much more, died in rural Afghanistan in 2004. He was killed in perhaps the most notorious fratricide in American military history, made all the more so by the Army's initial claims that devastating enemy fire ended his life. Was it bureaucratic incompetence or a conscious act of government deception? There's evidence for both, but neither possibility changes the fact that a fascinating human being's life was snuffed out in a deeply stupid and violent way. Even all these years later, writing about Tillman is tricky business. His family quite rightly pushes back when they feel his story is being used for ulterior motives. Back then, they defied military pressure to hold his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery and reminded those offering well-intentioned prayers that Pat was not with God because he was not religious. The fight over his memory endures. Just last year, over a flurry of tweets by President Trump about the NFL and the national anthem, Tillman's widow, Marie, issued a statement that made it clear his life and service should never be politicized in a way that divides us. Tillman, who was a safety for the Arizona Cardinals from 1998 to 2001, before enlisting in the Army in July of 2002 with his brother Kevin, was killed in Afghanistan in 2004.
Despite the ugliness surrounding his death, Tillman Maine continues to shine because of his life. And what a life. Just a few pieces of the Pat Tillman mosaic. Physical beast, NFL pro. Someone who parked his used Volvo station wagon beside his teammates' pristine Bentleys and Cadillacs. A proud freethinker who spent the eve of his first combat tour in Iraq with Emerson's self-reliance. In tradition of Bassiglione, resisted a Pentagon that wanted him to be Captain America when he just wanted to be a Ranger. The type of Ranger who promoted the new and young in a testosterone-soaked Lost Boy environment, who was going to go through him just to mess with fresh meat. Husband, son, brother, friend. Marie Tillman now chairs the Pat Tillman Foundation, a non-profit devoted to supporting veterans and military families through education. The foundation recently selected its 10th class of Tillman Scholars and has invested more than $16 million in academic support and scholarships since Tillman's death. It is one of the best nonprofits around, receiving 3 consecutive 4-star ratings from watchdog group Charity Navigator. I wanted the foundation to be something that's empowering to others, she says. I wanted to create something good and meaningful, something that represents the spirit of how Pat lived. She goes on to explain that the Tillman Scholars are Pat's living legacy, something that both honors and transcends him. The new scholars don't remember Tillman, the football player, she says, so much as they remember Pat, the fallen soldier. The youngest of them, after all, were children when 9/11 happened. Given Tillman's life, given his death, how has he affected a generation of soldiers that came after him? It's a big question, without clean-as-bones answers. Strength, service, sacrifice, and the greater good were abstract words before, yet also so much more. They remain abstract words. They still are so much more. And so, I don't honestly know. I'm just a citizen now, like any other, trying to make sense of a hyper-partisan America 17 years into a forever war. I do know this, though. When I meet with university ROTC cadets and young people considering listing after high school, Pat Tillman is a name that comes up a lot. They bring it up as they cite sources of inspiration. How can this be? How can someone's death, that's a case study in disaster at the Command and General Staff College, be encouraging to future enlistees? There's optimism bias involved, for sure. It won't happen to me. There's also the dark, mystic allure of combat. But after a few of these conversations and learning how to tease out why Tillman inspires them, I realize it's not because of how he died. It's because of how he lived. Because of his mind, because of his care, because of those abstract words like strength and service and sacrifice and the greater good, and how he was determined to live them in an era and a place where so few seem willing to try anymore. I think people are drawn to the Tillman story because he was all about trying to be a better human. Nate Boyer says, Boyer, the former Green Beret and NFL long snapper who helped broker the kneeling compromises with Colin Kaepernick during the 2016 national anthem saga. Boyer, an impressive man himself, but a little bit of awe slips into his voice as he talks about Tillman being one of his inspirations for joining the Army. Then there are the football tales. You hear from people who knew him, who played with him. He was kind of an out-there dude, Boyer says. He was a patriot, too. It's important people remember all sorts serve, all sorts protect this country. Tillman never reached the age of 30, like many of the 7,000 or so American service members killed in terror wars. He died at 27. They remain frozen in time, still impossibly young, impossibly dynamic. They remain as they were, filled with the hopes of a future they'll never know. Tens of thousands more live with physical, mental, and moral injuries. Their wars didn't turn out the way they thought. Tillman's didn't. That makes remembering them for who they were and what they sought from life all the more urgent. That makes turning away from gestures of hollow patriotism, no matter how comforting, towards the fullness of those young people's multitudes, all the more crucial. Time usually distills. It usually simplifies. Yet Pat Tillman's legacy has gotten more complex and nuanced since 2004. Back then, some wanted his life and memory sealed in a star-spangled amber, and his family wouldn't have it. They fought to preserve his complexity and nuance like he fought, ferociously but with care. The foundation that bears his name does the same, intent on providing opportunities and possibilities for those who might not have otherwise. Because of Pat Tillman, there will be future Pat Tillmans. Hell, there already have been. Young people who know what is sweet in life, what is terrible, and go out and meet what is to come. There's truth in that. There's power in that. There's much more than abstraction in that. Now it's up to the rest of us to ensure it wasn't in vain. Now it's up to the rest of us to make it worth it. Matt Gallagher is the author of Young Blood, is a former Army captain and a veteran of the Iraq War. On today's show, in the dedication description, there is a link to the Pat Tillman Foundation, pattillmanfoundation.org. And on this April 18th, there is a link to the 16th annual Pat's Run, which is a legacy to help his foundation. Please visit it. And today's dedication is not only to Pat Tillman. It is to all the brave men and women out there who serve in our military from the birth of this nation through today and into its marvelous future. It is also dedicated to the brave men and women out there that serve as first responders, be they law enforcement, firefighters, or emergency workers. May God bless each and every one of them. And I apologize to those that are looking on Facebook. I had the wrong video up. I have now corrected it to the video of Pat Tillman. We dedicate it with this song by Todd Allen Herndon, My Name is America.
The grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. Is my
All right, and we're back here. You're listening to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, Facebook. Oh, the heck with it. Go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Of course, I'm your hostess with the mostest, your radio chick, Annie, along with my co-host, Curtis, and the author, C.S. Bennett. Good, Curtis. Boy, that was a hard
That would be me.
dedication.
Hey, as we were talking about earlier, I got the opportunity to meet a living legend, and that's Coach Carter. This guy, he was a basketball coach at I guess one of those schools in the urban areas, and the kids weren't doing too well academically, although they were great, basketball players. But he set them out for a whole year until they got their academics up. And he caught a lot of flack from school board members and parents and things. But you know what? All those kids graduated. And that's what we need in our educational system today. We need people who's going to think about these kids' education before, the sports and what's good for the school as far as their image, thanks to the athletic program.
Well,
I think that's what we miss in discipline.
Well, that's why I think something like the Pat Tillman Foundation is something excellent, because he works with military families as well as military and veterans, helping them to get that education so that they can advance their life. And each and every one of these scholarships,
Right.
these kids, I shouldn't say call them kids, they're young adults. These adults go out and they go and give back to the community. If anyone were to go onto the pattillmanfoundation.org, look at some of the stories on there, and they're absolutely magnificent and beautiful stories. And what some of them do, they go on to be doctors, educators, and so much is given back to the community, and all in the name of Pat Tillman. We've got our guest in on the line now. Let's welcome aboard to the show. She is on the advisory board for Women for Trump, part of fighting to get Trump back another 4 years. Her website is also HeyTanya.com. Good afternoon, Tanya Gortz. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
All right. I had a little tough introduction because we do our dedication at the start in each and every show, and sometimes some are easier than others, but this one just tore me up. It was for Pat Tillman, and there's so much good that someone like he has done, and we look at other people that come out of situations similar to his, and they'd rather tear our country apart, and yet he and his family are building a legacy to build our nation back. And isn't this what we want?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We most definitely want people to be building their legacy back and bringing, like Donald Trump is doing, bringing back the American dream.
That he is. Did I just lose you? Your line just kind of like went blank. I think I lost her. I don't hear her, Curtis.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I thought I lost your line because I know you're doing the tour out in Iowa.
Yes, we are. The Women for Trump bus tour is happening now. We're on our second day. It's been fantastic. We are so excited to have so many wonderful women showing up and showing their support for our great president.
And, I caught the Wisconsin rally, and it looks like the crowds are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what I found interesting is that the numbers of people that were at the crowd, 1/4 of them, over 20,000 were identified as voters. From that, 15.7 thousand were from Wisconsin, which means another 5,000 people crossed over, drove miles, probably flew miles just to get there. Almost 58% were not Republicans, and they were showing up cheering for Trump.
So true.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. This is a movement like you can't imagine. It is so exciting. When we get the data from these rallies, it's shocking because I'm telling you what, I know somebody right now that is on their way to the next rally, coming from Wisconsin, going all the way to New Jersey. It's his 60th rally for his 60th birthday. He's spending all the money that he has to get there because he wants to look at the president. He wants to watch him in action. He has been so rejuvenated because this president has given him hope back. The American dream is back and strong, and the movement is so exciting. The numbers are growing, and people want to be involved.
Now, it's funny because at that Wisconsin rally, 1/4 of the people there said they had never voted. They did not vote in their last election.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, because I run our local Tea Party, and believe it or not, 10 years and strong, still doing it. We still meet monthly. We're meeting this Monday. But I had friends. We were out having cocktails, and he was complaining about what was going on, and Trump was running for the presidency. And I said, well, why aren't you doing something about it? And he goes, what? And I says, when was the last time you voted? Now, this was a military veteran. And he and his wife looked at me and goes, we've never voted. They said, we've never voted. And
my word.
And I'm sorry, they were in their 70s. They were in their 70s.
Oh, my word. That's insane.
And I looked
well,
at them,
there's a lot of people like them.
Yeah, and I said to them, so what gives you the right to complain if you're not willing to make a change? And do you know what? After the election,
very good.
They saw me, the next cocktail hour, they saw me, and they walked up to me and goes, we voted for the first time, and we voted for Trump. And that started...
Oh, that's so awesome.
That started in 2016. It has magnified and is rolling. It's steamrolling through 2020. I'm telling you, Janet.
It's unbelievable.
It's going to be...
Well, I'll tell you what. People have never had a candidate like Donald Trump. There's never been anybody who's going to be able to be tough enough to take down the Hillary Clinton machine. What Donald Trump has done in his 3.5 years of being a president of the United States, no one can touch that. And he's done that with nothing but people in his way, people trying to bring him down, people trying to sabotage every move along the way. This man is doing amazing things for our country, and we have to make sure that more people go out and vote for him because we need another 4 years of President Trump or our country's in big trouble.
You know, I find it funny because I sometimes look at these people that say that they've predicted so many elections correctly over so much, but there is a professor American University professor. He has predicted correctly the last 9 elections. And he was up on CNN, and his name is Alan Lichtman. And he said that in order for Trump to win in 2020, there's 13 key factors they look at. So unless 6 of them turn against him, he will be our next president. So I looked at the 13 factors. And the first one was party mandate, which affected the midterm elections. So if we lost seats in the House of Representatives, it lowers his possibility. So that is one factor we have in place. No worry. I think we're going to reverse that in 2020. Number 2 is the contest. No serious contest for the incumbent nomination. We have no serious contestant. So that's
right.
Check mark number 2. He's an incumbent. That's check number 3. There's no significant third party or independent campaign. Check mark number 3 in our favor. We got a good short-term...
Well, we're on a roll.
We got a good short-term economy, which is excellent. We've got a good long-term economy. Look at the last 3 years and what we're looking for now. So,
yeah.
So far, we've got 1 out of 6 going against us. Number 7, policy change. The incumbent administration affects major changes in national policy. Obozo care, building the wall, strengthening the military, getting our economy back, check mark. So we've got 6 out of 7.
USMCA, might I add, USMCA
that comes,
just got signed phase 1.
That comes up a little bit further on because he talks about social unrest.
Okay, good.
And social unrest, and the closer we get to the election, I'm saying people be out there, be safe, because expect Black Lives Matter to be out there, expect Antifa to be out there, expect the Black Panthers to be out there to try to obstruct the polling places. Be careful, be safe. So I do expect that to happen. The scandal, we have the impeachment, which I think it's going to blow away long before the election. Now we have foreign military failure. He has no major foreign military failure. He has military success, foreign and military successes. So far, we've got 8 out of 11 going for us. Incumbent charisma in bucket loads. And no challenger charisma. And the challenger has no charisma. We have 10 out of 13 going for us. We are so on.
Oh, that's so exciting. That just made my day. That's the best news I heard all day. I know. I'm so excited, and I'm so honored to work for such an amazing man. This is a guy I've known for over 15 years, and so this is not a job for me. This is personal, and I just can't tell you that this is a man who fights day in and day out, as does his family, for all of us and for all of our families.
You know, every time I speak to someone that is working with President Trump, they have similar stories. Pastor Paula White Cain, she says the same thing. Judge Jeanine Pirro, she says the same thing. Daphne Baruch and her life partner, Bill, they say the same thing. These are people that have known him for a long, long time. You get the fly-by-night people like Avenatti that cause the problems. But if the media were ever to ask you...
Exactly.
I mean, look at this latest clown.
Exactly.
This was up in New York City. What is his name? Pavlov Dogs, what I've been calling him.
You know, there's so many clowns that come out of the woodwork because everybody wants to be relevant, and you just attach yourself to a controversy or a scam or a scandal with Donald Trump, and you can make it up, and boom, you'll be relevant for 15 minutes. The media will love you for 15 minutes. Then you'll be proved wrong, and the campaign will find out that you're a liar and will expose you because that's what people do. And then guess what? After the media builds you up and makes you famous, they'll eat you up and spit you right out, and now you'll be back to being irrelevant. My advice would be for people to just put their head down and maybe go get a job, because Donald Trump's created over 7.4 million jobs for the working class American, if you should so want it. So these people need to go get a job instead of worrying about how they can become relevant by attaching themselves in a negative way to Donald Trump.
You know, what I find amazing, because my mom is in her 80s, and she has me keeping an eye on an investment account my dad had left her when he passed away. And before Trump was elected, we saw a huge dip. And at one point she said, you know, Ann, I can't take any more money out of there. Otherwise, if anything were to happen to me and I need it for my health or an emergency, it's not going to be there. And I said, all right, Mom, we'll leave it alone and we'll see what happens. I looked at this. It not only doubled back to what value was before Obama came in office, but it has increased in the last 6 months an additional $6,000 for her. And it's not a large
it's unbelievable.
sum.
I call it the Trump boom.
Yeah.
It's a great amount of money for doing nothing, because except for having a president who is a billionaire and knows how to run a business. Hello, that's a great turnaround.
Yeah.
For doing nothing.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic.
There are things that we could criticize rightly for Trump for doing, because a lot of us disagreed when and someone pointed out in the chat room, the Patriot Act. I would have loved to see that go to the wayside, because look at the abuse it's been used with the FISA warrants, all based upon that law that went into effect after 9/11. I would love to see that Patriot Act go. So if you get Trump's ear, say, get rid of the Patriot Act. So think of something else.
Yes,
to protect
and you know
our
what?
nation.
I will tell you this. The one thing about our president, our great President Trump, is he takes all things into consideration. He is so smart. He makes sure he's surrounded by intelligent people who give him all the facts. That's why he's doing so much for the opioid crisis. That's why he's making sure that our pharmaceutical companies have to be responsible and let us know where is this money actually going and why do the prescription drugs cost so much. That's why he's fighting for insurance companies to say, you're going to come in for surgery, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars. Oh, that Band-Aid's going to be $50. So you can decide whether or not you need this treatment. Donald Trump is doing a lot of amazing things. And so I'm sure I know that's been to his table, and he will give everything serious consideration. And if it stays, it's staying for a reason. And if it goes, it's going because it's not good for the American people. Just like, what has he done for the prisoners, prison reform? There are so many people that are coming out of the prison system that are getting rebuilt. They're getting education. They're getting apprenticeships. They're getting a second chance, because our president is a man of second chances. He believes that if you didn't do a violent crime and you've paid, your penance and you've done your time, you should be able to have a second chance. And I mean, I could go on for hours on this show talking about the amazing things that he's done. As you can tell, I'm very passionate. And like I said, when you find somebody who's personal, or this is personal for them and it's not a job, it's a whole different ball game. And I want to make sure that all of your listeners understand that, this isn't in the bag yet, because we have every army, every force of nature going against the Trump 2020 reelection. So everyone needs to do their part.
Oh, absolutely, and expect some vote tampering. We already know to look for that. And I mentioned to my own county GOP about here in South Carolina, we have vote harvesting. And out of the entire room, including the executive committee, which was about maybe 200 people, only one other person knew about the vote harvesting, and she was a former state representative for me. We were the only two that knew it. How many states have votes? Florida, California. We've got to get the word out. I mean, there's so many ways they can steal it.
Oh, and I know, and we know that. Don't think for one second the Trump campaign doesn't have their eyes on that. We know it. We know exactly what they're capable of. But we're going to come in full force. We're hoping for a Trump landslide. A tsunami's coming. I mean, wherever you're at. I mean, I'm in Iowa, freezing, negative 20-degree wind chill factor right now. So I'll say a blizzard's coming, and the Democrats aren't going to be ready for what's about to hit them. But we do need to do our part and not assume that this is a guarantee.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I know you could only stay with us for a few minutes because you are doing the Iowa tour, and I'm sure you want to get into somewhere nice and warm. But thank you for the hard work. And you mentioned you can spend hours with us. I'm going to take you up on that.
I would love that. I mean, this is tough. We're all hands on deck. We are This re-election is brutal because we're working so hard to ensure that we've got people going out to caucus and doing their part. So I would love to spend more time with you, but getting a couple hours is going to be very difficult until we get this man back into the White House for another 4 more years.
Well, I'm trying to get candidates up on here on each and every show to help push the conservative message, people that are willing to put their neck out there and support President Trump. So I'm doing what I can on my end through the show, through my Tea Party, through my local GOP, and by having people like you and supporting you. So thank you so much. People can find you at
well, thank you.
HeyTana.com.
Yep, HeyTana.com. HeyTana.com. I love to connect with anybody who wants to reach out.
Oh, thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless you as well. Take care.
All right. Check her out, HeyTana.com. So much fun to have people like this. And Gabrielle over at the RNC headquarters is so sweet in sending these people to us, Curtis, every week. But I want to do something a little differently, Curtis. I don't know if anyone caught in the news. Was it yesterday or the day before? An ex-NFL player out of the Saints has ALS. And he's been battling it for 9 years. His name is Steve Gleason. And he was at the White House, was it yesterday or the day before? Forgive me. No, 2 days ago. 2 days ago.
It might have been yesterday.
No, it was Wednesday. And he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Only the 200th civilian ever to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. And I put a little something here because he's still very much alive, but I want to recognize him for the work he does for people suffering with disabilities such as his, such as Lou Gehrig's disease. And this is from the Daily Mail. I took out a couple segments, and after that I want to play the clip of his speech. And so you understand, he no longer has voluntary ability to speak. He's lost his vocal cords. He's lost his mobility. And yet he's still active. He still shows up at state practices. He still shows up at special public events. He has a special wheelchair that he helped design. He has helped design with Microsoft a special system tracking his eye movements, which allows him to communicate, to write and to speak through his computer. And this is from the Daily Mail, and it's in segments. Former NFL player Steve Gleason has received the Congressional Gold Medal for his work as an advocate for the people with Lou Gehrig's disease. It is the highest civilian honor bestowed by Congress and was presented to the former safety on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. for his work with others that suffer of the condition, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, or motor neuron disease, MND. Gleason, who spent 7 years at the New Orleans Saints, is one of fewer than 200 people who have received the gold medal. He is 42 years old. He joins a list of winners that include Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the Wright brothers, Charles Lindbergh, Thomas Edison, Dr. Jonas Salk, and astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, who took Apollo 11 to the moon. On January of 2011, he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, a struggle he documented in the 2016 film titled Gleason. Stephen Gleason speaks through an independence drive system and voice bank, which he helped to develop with Microsoft. He has since spearheaded efforts through Team Gleason Foundation to develop and provide technology to help ALS patients live longer, more fulfilling lives, from mobility to being able to communicate. And as I cue this up, this is Steve Gleason addressing the audience after receiving the award.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, Leaders McConnell, Schumer, and McCarthy, Senators Cassidy and Murray, Representatives Richmond and Scalise, and all members of Congress. Also, thank you for coming to DC and speaking today, Drew. Just so everyone knows, today is Drew's birthday. So, Drew, let me wish you a very capital happy birthday, brother. This award, from the elected officials, who represent the people of the United States of America, is a sublime honor for me. But, I feel that, more importantly, I feel that this honor represents some joy, encouragement, and even triumph, for the tens of thousands of extraordinary families, currently enduring life with ALS. Also, the millions of extraordinary people in this country, living with disabilities or other illness, and more broadly, all of you ordinary humans, who experience adversity, tragedy, or anguish. No one is immune from anguish, tragedy, or adversity. Not even elected officials, NFL players, or even the most holy saints. I suppose I don't see my story as a football story, or even an ALS story, but rather, a human story. The truth is that we all experience pain in our lives. But, I believe that the problems we face are our opportunity and define our human purpose. I believe that adversity is our opportunity to keep exploring, because we will all face pain and tragedy, but it's clear to me that, beyond the human capacity of imagination, our greatest strength, as a species, has been our ability to bravely share our weaknesses and vulnerabilities with each other. Doing that, we're able to understand each other's issues, and collaborate together to solve problems, and overcome any obstacle. While sharing one's weaknesses may not be common practice for people, especially for politicians in an election year, wink wink, sharing my weaknesses was entirely critical for me to play 8 years in the NFL. And it has been unquestionably critical to my survival and purpose for the past 9 years, living with a disease as dreadfully beautiful as ALS. I'm grateful to the literally thousands of people who have directly uplifted me, both emotionally and physically in my 42 years. Most importantly, I'm grateful to my parents, for instilling in me many of the values I've used to be successful. And, of course, my wife Michelle. This is not the life we imagined, and it hasn't been easy, but through communication and compassion, we're carving out an awesome existence. In addition to having the understanding that I had to share my weaknesses to survive and succeed, I'm fortunate to have a motivation and a reason to live. Our son Rivers, and our daughter Gray. They give me purpose, the purpose of a lifetime. Some of you may disagree, but I believe there has been no greater time in history to be a human. At the same time, I don't think anyone here, or anyone watching will disagree that we as a country, and more appropriately, we as a global species, face enormous challenges in the coming decades of the 21st century. Challenges like exploring and colonizing other planets, or thoughtfully solving climate change, or the challenges of genetically engineering superhumans, or positively harnessing the seemingly miraculous power of artificial intelligence so people's disabilities are turned into super abilities. These challenges provide us with an exponential opportunity, as Americans, and as humans. Because if we can keep exploring, share our weaknesses with each other, and compassionately collaborate to solve problems, our human potential is boundless. If we can work to understand and solve each other's problems, and each other's pain, compassionately, then, truly, all things are possible. Thank you again, to the people of the United States of America, a nation I'm so proud to live in, for this unbelievable honor. Have a wonderful day.
Wow, was that not powerful, Curtis?
It is. I mean, this guy, he could have been like some people and threw a pity party, but he didn't, you know. He decided to do something with his life in spite of his disability and what he was going through. And that's something to admire and commend.
Yeah, he's not speaking for all disabled people because not everyone is the same. But what he's saying is that no matter what life hands you, let's try to look at it in a way that you can make the best of whatever your situation is. You know, it's
That's right.
He's taken his disability and learned from it and helped develop devices that help people in similar situations because he lives it. He says, I'm in this situation. I know what you're going through. Let me see what we can do together to make us more comfortable, more productive, more human, being able to interact with their family. I mean, this guy is bound to a wheelchair. He'll never get up and walk. He'll never hold his children. He'll never be able to make love to his wife ever again. But what he has given back to so many people is the ability to at least speak. Can you imagine being locked in your head and unable to tell people what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you need, what you want? And he's found a way to conquer that. And that is why he's getting the medal. He's not throwing a pity party. He's saying, I'm not talking to everyone else like me. I'm not speaking for anyone else. But I'm saying, this is what I've been able to accomplish. This is what I want to do for you. Let's move forward.
You know, sometimes I wonder if someone like the scientist, Stephen Hawking, had he lived like maybe 70, 80 years ago, where would he be without the technology that allowed him to communicate? You know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephen Hawking, but he had a disability and became a quadriplegic, had to be in a wheelchair. Great scientist. But he was able to speak through a computer program. Mm-hmm. Now, had he been born like 70, 80 years ago, when we didn't have this technology, it would have been a great loss to the scientific world because he was a brilliant scientific mind.
Yeah, well, there's a mention in the
cabinet. So it just goes to show, thank goodness we have the technology.
We do. And we have advanced so far, and the way science has advanced is amazing. You know, there is a comment in the chat room that the challenges of mankind to come. What we have learned through our space exploration, the experiments that go up there, and what they do to test the astronauts when they come back, to see what the effects are, because a lot of people, as they grow older, are no longer moving their legs, and we're finding that when these astronauts go up there in zero gravity, they start to lose the muscle tone. And they come back like people that are in their 80s and 90s, having to rebuild their muscles in their legs. These are things they're learning to help those that are of the geriatric age, like myself, how to regain that muscle tone, how to rebuild it, what works, what doesn't work. And not only that, the technologies they advance. We would never have had Tang if it wasn't for NASA. Things like that. And genetics, what we're learning through gene replacement therapy to help people with cancers and other hereditary diseases to help them overcome it. How we can learn how to regrow body parts, like replacing an ear, or what we can do with mechanics to help someone that no longer has their arms or legs. These are coming all through not just space exploration, but through other science testing and through genetics, learning what does and does not work. People are still saying it's a global economy, and you may not agree with the fact he stands with global warming. Fine. But look what the man has accomplished. You may not agree with his politics with global warming and the global society. I don't care. What he has done for other people and what he is striving to do with his disabilities is phenomenal and worth acknowledging.
So true.
And we do have our next...
You'll never understand that unless you're in his, shoes, walk a mile in his shoes.
Exactly. Now, if I can get my fingers to work here, and we'll bring our next victim up in on the line. Let's welcome congressional candidate for California District 8, former pro NFL player and retired USMC hoorah, Jeremy Statt. Good afternoon, Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing fine. I got to tell you, I told you I start off each show with a dedication to a fallen hero, and some I can get through very easily. And I chose to read the article that Mike Gallagher wrote in Men's Health, and I'm sure you've read it. And that was difficult to get through. But we did do the dedication to your friend Pat Tillman at the start of the show.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You knew him.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat and I played together at Arizona State University, where we actually had the opportunity to play in the 1997 Rose Bowl for the National Championship. We also played in the 97 Sun Bowl. And we also had the same agent when we went into the NFL together when we got drafted in 98. Pat was a very intricate part of my background and some of my victories as far as upon the football field. We also had the same agent when we went into the NFL when we both got drafted in 98. Frank Bauer was our agent. So we actually had the same agent throughout our careers in the NFL, and subsequently also decided to walk the same path as many of million others of our veterans who have, answered the call to serve. And so Pat was a very intricate part of my life early on, and it's very unfortunate that we lost such a great man.
Yeah, and he does have now his foundation, which I brought up with his the 16th annual Pat Tillman run coming up in April, which I told people to go to his website, pattillmanfoundation.org. But your website for your congressional run is your last name, STAAT, statforcongress.com, which I have up here on the webpage. People can click on it and go to your page and help you with your campaign. After 9/11, you chose to give up your NFL career and go into the Marine Corps. But Pat Tillman told you, hold on, wait a minute, do something for yourself and your family first.
Well, absolutely. At that time, in 2001, there was a transition thing. There was a whole bunch of off-the-field stuff that I was dealing with. My parents were going through divorce. The girlfriend I was dating at the time was doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I felt that if I could be on the West Coast closer to my family, I could help fix the problem. That's one of the things as a man, we always say we can fix everything, but as I grow older, I realize that it's not my place to fix other people, it's God's place. And so, got it coast, went to Seattle and essentially got released, even though I had great numbers going into preseason, coming out of preseason, got released. And lo and behold, that's when 9/11 hit. And after 9/11, I decided, there's more to life than just a game. And being a third-generation veteran with my grandfather serving in World War II in the Navy, and then my father serving in Vietnam in the Army, I felt it was my time to answer the calling as well. And so I just kind of started looking other ways, other directions besides the NFL. And that's when Frank Bauer, our agent, basically came and asked Pat, said, hey, what's going on with Jeremy? He wants to join the Army or something. You need to tell him he's got 3 years under his belt. He needs to get this force so he can get his retirement. Talking, out of joining the Army. and go back in the NFL. And so subsequently, after about a 2-hour conversation with Pat one day, I made a promise to him that I would go back into the NFL, get my retirement, and then he basically told me I could go do whatever the hell I want. So once I had his blessing on that, I went ahead and fulfilled my word and went back in the NFL. And lo and behold, God has a way of making things work. That was actually a 2-year transition where I didn't play at all on any team between essentially 2001 and 2003. But that was also the time that Pat got his 4th credited season and then subsequently joined the Army Rangers. And then in 2003, I actually signed on with the St. Louis Rams, earned my final credited season and called it a career and retired, and decided to go into the Arena Football League in 2004, thinking, well, man, I got my retirement from the NFL, might as well go into the AFL, play it 4 years, get another retirement, and essentially have 2 retirements by the time I was 31 years old. But unfortunately, the AFL didn't happen because that's obviously when Pat was killed in April of 2004, and I decided to completely retire out of professional athletics and did some serious soul searching, a whole bunch of drinking, and then decided that, it's time for me to pull myself together here, and decided to join the Marine Corps in 2005 and did 4 years in the Marine Corps as an infantry machine gunner before getting out in 2009.
Well, you were sent to the stumps, right?
I was actually, I came out of Camp Pendleton, MCRD. Came out of MCRD to Camp Pendleton, SOI. And then my duty station was with 13 Bravo Company in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii.
Oh, nice. Nice. I don't know if the Marine Corps still has the hotel there, but my ex-husband and I spent a nice 2 weeks there. He was a gunnery sergeant. I happen to live in the part of the Tri-Command here in South Carolina, so I've got down the street the Paris Island, I've got up the road the Marine Corps Air Station, and I got on the other side the Navy Hospital. So, I also tended bar in the Marine Corps NCO club, so I know the Marine Corps pretty well.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, but
I probably know it better than.
Well, as I tell people, because when my ex-husband was at 1st Mardiv in Garden City, New York, the commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Kelly, Raymond Kelly. And he would come into the NCO club, and I would see him and greet him and everything. And I was a bartender there. And years later, when I joined NYPD, he then became the police commissioner. And I saw him at a fraternity event, and he's looking at me like, I know you. And I said, yeah. And I said, Gunny Hardy's ex-wife. And he goes, you lose weight? And I said, yeah, 165 ugly pounds. He goes, I never thought you were that heavy. He said, I know, I divorced him. True story.
Wow, good for you. He's on the weight loss, girl. That's amazing.
No, I divorced. You get it? I divorced him. I didn't lose weight. I divorced him.
Oh.
Hey, Jerry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when Pat decided to sign up, was his teammates supportive of his decision, and were you?
I was supportive of him. I actually called him up because I was actually in 2002. I had signed a contract with the Oakland Raiders, and was at Pat Marie's wedding. And it was funny because Frank Bauer, who was our agent once again, came to me and said, "Hey, go talk to Patty, man. He's got this $3.6 million contract, and he hasn't signed it. Why don't you go talk to him and see what's going on?" So I said, "All right, Frank." And when I'm going to talk to Pat about it, and he said, "Listen," he goes, "I got some other things that I got going on. I've got, I'll get back to that later." And he said, basically, we're at my wedding, let's enjoy ourselves. Let's not talk about this stuff. I said, all right, very well. But after Pat and Kevin was actually my roommate, my senior year at ASU. Pat's brother, Kevin, was actually my roommate. But they went off to boot camp, and, there was some stuff that came out from the Cardinals organization. A couple of players were like, well, good, he needs to leave because he wasn't that good anyways. And it was kind of like, wow, really? And I'll have to go back and look who said that. But, it was kind of a crappy way to send a guy off who essentially, turned down a $3.6 million contract put his life on the line so that, his other teammates could go out and play a dumb game. But it was pretty, it was very, an emotional time at that point, because of what, he had chosen to do. And then of course the media ate it up and were all over him. But, Pat wasn't the type of guy that wanted that kind of exposure. But yeah, along with some of the teammates, some of them were pretty supportive and others were kind of like, well, what are you doing? You're an idiot. But, it is what it is. And, he went out there and did what he thought he needed to do. And, unfortunately lost his life doing it.
Not to go too deep into this one, but, you went in at an older age, and same thing with me. At an older age, I joined NYPD. But there is another fellow Cardinal, and where did I put that information, that just recently went into the Army, and he's supposed to be graduating boot camp this February. And you spoke about him in a news article, and I forgot what I put with that article.
Yeah, absolutely. When he came out, I actually joined at 29 years old. So I actually had to sign a height waiver, a weight waiver, age waiver, all kinds of stuff. But, oh gosh, his name is slipping my mind right now. But yeah, he actually, played, I think, 2 years with the Cardinals and decided that he wanted to go and serve as well.
Jimmy
and
Legree.
I think it's great. I like to see when...
Jimmy Legree.
What's that?
Jimmy Legree.
That's the one. And Legree, and I think it's great what he's doing. I wish more guys would do that as well. Because the one thing we're talking about today, when it becomes, especially in the NFL and in the military service, everybody's talking about the T word, the big transition word. And a lot of the players that come out of the NFL, they're lost. They don't know what's going on because now they're not making all this money. They're not living in that fishbowl lifestyle. Whereas with the military, the same thing. Nobody's knocking on your door telling you have to be someplace in this big transitional thing. And I love the fact that he decided that, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the structured life that I've had in the NFL. I'm going to, turn it over and go into the Army, which I think is great. I think it's amazing, especially with the fact that he comes out, pretty much unscathed and honorably discharged. He gets all kinds of awesome benefits. He'll get his health care benefits, his VA health care benefits. He gets his GI Bill, which he can go back to school. I actually used my GI Bill to finish up my master's, my EDS degree, and I'm currently a dissertation shy of my doctoral degree. It was all because I chose to serve.
Yeah, and you are now teaching at a college. You also, when you got out of the military, veteran issues became a really big thing with you. You started your own foundation, and just this last year, you rode across the country riding 3,468 miles. Do I have that correctly? About veteran suicide?
Absolutely. That was actually in 2012. It was 3,468 miles. I rode from the Wall of Valor in Bakersfield, California, and basically zigzagged my way across the lower parts of the United States, all the way up into the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. And we decided that in order to bring honor to our veterans, we wanted to hit every single war memorial, VA hospital, veteran, retirement home, military installation, all the way across the country. And it was beautiful. It was amazing to see the country at, 19 miles an hour. And, it was met with lots and lots of attention because most people don't want to talk about a taboo subject such as suicide, especially when it comes to our veterans. But most people don't realize that we've lost more veterans to suicide than we have in all of the conflicts or war campaigns since World War II. And the biggest casualty when it comes to veteran suicide is our Vietnam veterans. We lose more Vietnam veterans to suicide than any other generation right now when it comes to our veterans. And so I wanted to bring awareness to that because, once again, my father was a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah. My dad was World War II. Both of my grandparents were World War I. So I understand coming from that background. But you wanted to pay it forward. So you said, I'm going to run for Congress in a district where the incumbent is leaving to run for a county seat. I don't know why you want to go from Congress down to a county seat, but you are the only Marine running. There's another gentleman in there that's Coast Guard, but you want to say, we need the military voice in Congress.
Well, absolutely. Right now, one thing I'm learning as a first-time candidate, I'm realizing that a lot of people don't even know what's going on in the political world. You know, a lot of us just want to throw our vote down, or vote red or blue or purple or whatever color, you know, that is favorable to people. But what I'm learning is that, you know, right now we've got the lowest percentage of veterans in Congress than we've ever seen, almost than we've ever seen. I think the last cycle, 2016, it was 16%. This time around, we're at 22%. So out of the 435 seats in Congress, only 22% of them are actually veterans. And the problem I have with this is that I despise politicians. I have no desire to be one, but unfortunately, somebody's got to get in and hold these people accountable. And so I want our veterans to be treated, you know, better than our politicians. My thing is this, is the majority of these politicians that are in office right now have never put their life on the line for this country, but yet they're being celebritized, if you will, you know, being put above all these other people, especially veterans. So I'm sick and tired of seeing our veterans treated like second-class citizens next to politicians and non-citizens. You know, it's absolutely absurd that we signed a blank check payable upon death to this country, but yet we've got politicians who would rather, you know, get the votes from non-citizens who haven't put their life on the line for nothing, especially for our country. Most of them don't even want to follow the rules as far as coming through the ports of entry, but yet here veterans sit homeless without the benefits that they need, and yet these politicians want to give it to whomever they want based on a vote. And I think that's absolutely wrong.
Now, I got to admit, my co-host, C.S. Bennett, happens to be a Navy veteran, so Gulf War. So we're in good company here, gents, today. You know, I was up on your website, and I was trying to find where you stand on certain issues. I pretty much think I know where you stand, but a lot of us that when we do look at a candidate want to see something up there. So I'm just going to start pumping them past you and letting you, you know, just answer what your position is. Because now you mentioned...
Yeah, we're working on that website. Trust me, if you knew the background of what I've already fired all my consultants because of for deception and you know, lack of integrity. So I'm actually rebuilding my campaign again because, you know, people are saying, well, that's just the way it is. I said, well, that's not the way I'm going to run my campaign. You know, I'm responsible for those people who donate. I'm responsible for those monies, and you know, my consultants are just kind of like, well, we'll just raise more money, spend it all you can. It's like, no. That's not how it's going to go. But we're working on the website right now to get a new website up so that those issues will be on there. But essentially, the 5 issues of my platform or my that I'm running on are basically veteran advocacy, fixing that VA healthcare system. You know, if these politicians believe that they, you know, some of these are pushing socialized healthcare, well, they don't have to look very far. We've got it. It's called the VA system. You know, hey, Bernie, AOC, hey, you know, Camilla Harris, all the other guys that want this socialized health care, hey, go ahead and drop your health care coverage and sign up for the VA healthcare system. I guarantee you we'll get that thing fixed overnight. I'm a huge Second Amendment guy. I believe that if the local, state, and federal government cannot guarantee the protection of my family, then they can't basically govern the way in which I choose to protect them. And so also border security. I have no problem with people coming here wanting to make this country great. All I'm asking is, hey, come through the ports of entry. We're a country of laws, and as a citizen, if I have to abide by the laws when purchasing a firearm or getting a driver's license or whatever, then so should they. And then the other thing is free enterprise. You know, we need to start deregulating some of these issues, some of these taxes and regulations on, you know, the small business owner. I mean, my goodness, the small business owner, especially in the state of California, I mean, I don't know how they can't even operate. They're so suffocated by so many regulations and laws and taxes and everything. They don't have room to grow.
You know, I was a former small business owner, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But fortunately, President Trump has started to lessen the regulations, and small businesses are starting to grow back again, which is very heartening. But I want to go back to the border because you mentioned that. We see now the border starting to go up. It's not going up as fast as people would like it to be, because you're always going to have people filing a lawsuit protecting some little endangered toe-toed or something, whatever you want to call it, or saying that you're violating the human rights and saying, no, you got to let them through. No, we don't. Just name me one other country that has such an open border position. We don't. It doesn't exist. Try that with China or North Korea. You'll be in the gulag faster than you can say help. So it's ridiculous.
Well, I tell people all the time, especially out here in California, there's fences everywhere. There's walls. Every single home in California, I'd say 90% of them have a wall or some sort of fence around their property. And so when people come to me and say, well, we don't need a wall to border, I say, okay, we'll take down your fences around your house. Oh, well, no, that's my privacy, Or it's like, well, no kidding. That's exactly the point. It's their security. Well, might have dogs. Well, you know what? Get an electronic dog collar. And then, no, I'm not going to take my fence down. I'm like, well, then what's the difference? So like I said, yeah, especially out here. I mean, we deal with the Delta smelt, this fish that is up and from my understanding, it's not even a indigenous fish. But they're controlling the water supply from Northern California down to the southern part, and it's basically killing farmers and stuff up and down, the aqueducts that we have here because they're not releasing the water because of this Delta smelt.
Yeah, that's been going on for more than a decade, and California used to be the greenest and luscious state in the union. Most of our produce and dairy and beef came out of California, believe it or not. I mean, I was driving through there back in, good Lord, 81, 82. And of course, driving down the LA freeway, they don't let you off the exits. I got off of the wrong one in a rented Camaro doing about 85 miles an hour to get to the airport. But it's such a beautiful country, and they've killed it. They've actually killed it, which is why we need people like you to bring it back. I mean, here they are. They claim to be environmentalists, and they kill the very thing that would protect the environment.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I'm all about conservation as well. I'm a hunter. I believe I want to go out into the wilderness and be able to essentially enjoy it. But the way that things are going here, there's actually a big conservative global conglomerate that is actually trying to turn California back into the 100 years ago. They actually want to get rid of infrastructure. They want to basically turn the state of California back into its natural habitat as much as possible. And so essentially that's why they're pushing all this, mass transit, this bullet train. They're taxing the crap out of our fuel. I mean, for me to register my car every year, I mean, it's $600-700. And my truck is 6 or 7 years old just because it's a diesel. And then what they're trying to do is they're trying to come down with this climate change garbage and try to get you to be carb compliant. And if you're not carb compliant, then they're going to fine you and or confiscate your vehicle. I mean, it's crazy. They got this crazy idea that, that humans somehow have an effect on the climate. And I keep saying, I even tell my students, I said, wait a minute, think about this. This Earth, depending on what you believe, has been spinning for 5.2 billion years. We've had 3 ice ages. We've had at least 1 flood that we know about, and there were no cars around when that happened. So it's like, how does that happen? And then I tell my students, say, do this. Here's an experiment. If you think because the atmosphere is heating up, and that atmosphere is heating up, which is causing the temperature in the oceans to increase, I say, go home, fill up your bathtub, turn on your heater in the house, and see how long it takes for that tub of water to increase by 1 degree. It'll never happen. We don't use common sense or logic anymore. It's all about how we feel. How do you feel today?
I love to tell people, are you aware that the world was very much warmer when Christ walked it than it is today? Oh, no. Yeah, and you saw he wore long woolen robes. Think about that. Anyway.
Well, yeah, now the thing about that is not only that, but if you look at it, if the world's been spinning 5.2 billion, whatever you want to believe, we've actually only been accurately measuring climate for maybe 100 years. Mm-hmm. So you think about, 5.2 billion, we've been doing it for 100 years. Okay, that's like not even a snap. That's not even a blink. Like, stop. It's ludicrous. But the state of California here is absolutely out of control when it comes to some of these policies they're pushing. It makes no sense.
It doesn't. I'm going to go on to the next one because you mentioned the Second Amendment. And right now, Virginia is the battleground. I mean, California's bad, New York
Absolutely.
is bad, New Jersey's bad, but Virginia is now the battleground. And the NRA and Gun Owners of America are seeking injunctions because Governor Blackface has deemed the Capitol a gun-free zone. Matter of fact, he's made it even more than that. He's made it a weapon-free zone. So bats and knives aren't allowed. But you know what? Anything could be used as a weapon. You know that. I know that. Anything could be turned into a weapon. So how are you going to have a weapon-free zone? So this is a huge battle now going between the government of Virginia against the citizens of Virginia. If you were to get to Congress, what would you do to help protect the Second Amendment rights of all citizens?
I mean, at this point now, I wouldn't push anything that has to do with the gun control. I would oppose everything because at this point, we're not looking outside the box. And these people are so, laser intent on taking people's guns away. But the problem is, it's like you said, an inanimate object, a gun, a knife, a baseball bat, a hammer. For God's sakes, if you look at 9/11, it wasn't a gun. It was a plane. They took 2 planes and killed over 3,000 people, and people are still dying today from the after effects. You look at Nice, France. The guy killed, 152 people, injuring over 300. He used a tractor trailer. He basically just ran through a parade. So, I mean, the thing about it is it comes down to this. If somebody has the desire to hurt somebody and they have an opportunity, they're going to take it, whether it's with a truck, whether it's with a semi-truck, whether it's a plane, whether it's with a hammer. Now, they can sit there and say, well, the guns were designed to kill. No, they weren't. They're a defensive weapon. They're designed to protect. When I was in Iraq, you know what? I didn't jump off the helicopter and just start using my M16A4 as an offensive weapon. I used it as a defensive weapon to protect the civilians and my guys, my other Marines. So the problem is they're trying to push this thing to basically control the people. And our forefathers saw that. They fought against it. And it's sad to see that, the people of today want to rely so heavily upon the government for their protection, their money, their health care. And it's like the more you rely upon something, the more it controls you. And the sad thing is that I'm in the educational system. I'm seeing how kids are being institutionalized and basically brought up to believe that the government is good, big government is good, let the government take care of you, because most of the professors, most of these individuals who are in these educational institutions have never had to work a real job in their lives. They went through high school, they went to college, they got a job as an elementary school teacher, what have you, and then they went back to school, worked on their bachelor's and master's degree, and next thing you know, they make it to the collegiate level of education without ever having to spend time in the real world.
That's the unfortunate part. A lot of these professors are in there. Once they get tenured, you can't get rid of them to begin with, and they've never understood what the real world was. They live in a little academic bubble, and there will always be the academics, and then there will be the rest of us. And slight correction, because you had mentioned 2 planes on 9/11. 2 planes went into the Twin Towers, to be correct. It was a total of 4 planes that were used to assault us. 3 go down. One into the Pentagon, 1 into the Pennsylvania field, so a total of 4. That wasn't an error you meant. You just meant about the Twin Towers. But we have the assault.
Correct. I was saying as far as using.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
With the assault on the Second Amendment, they also have been the sanctuary cities. So you have cities that are now gun-free zones, and yet they're open doors to illegal aliens. And we have now this recent tragedy in New York City, in Brooklyn, where this illegal alien was arrested for attacking his father, slashing at his father, attempting to kill his dad. And then he gets arrested with the new no bail policy New York City has, is back out on the street with no bail. And then he goes forward, and the first week of January, he attacks a 92-year-old woman, leaves her dead on the sidewalk. She didn't die right away. He sexually assaulted her, broke several ribs, broke her spine, and left her for dead, and then she passed away several days later. this is what they're happening. You don't defend our Second Amendment rights. You don't defend the citizens of your city by making it a sanctuary city. Would you, when you get to Congress, pass legislation saying if this is a illegal alien sanctuary city, we will yank any federal funding and grants from it?
Absolutely, and that's the way it needs to be. Once again, all this funding was supposed to be for citizens, not non-citizens. My thing is I would love to put, restrictions or even implement some sort of policies to charge the countries of where these people are coming from. Why are we not charging these other countries for taking care of their citizens? Is that going to ruffle too many feathers? I don't understand that. Why are we, as the working class Americans, having to pay for all these other people's benefits when, heck, we're just trying to live ourselves? I mean, we're the most gracious nation on earth, but at the same time, at some point, we have to say enough is enough. We can't continue to basically enable these people to continue to keep coming over here, refugees or non-citizens or whatever you want to call them. But at the same time, we got to take care of our Americans first. I mean, heck, we can't even do a good job of taking care of our veterans. So it's very frustrating to me. But at the same time, you've got these individuals who have been sitting in, political seats for 40, 50 years, and they want to blame all the problems of this country on a man who's been sitting in the Oval Office for less than 3.5 years. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Jeremy.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The president has taken a lot of flack for being supportive of some of our special forces operators who were imprisoned under the last administration. Now, you served over there. I want to know what the rules of engagement were when you served, and do you support the president's support of these people who were jailed, trying to serve their country and do their job?
Well, my thing is this. Our rules of engagement were kind of a joke. I mean, there was essentially I would have to use like-for-like weapon. So, for instance, if someone was shooting at me with an AK-47, I would have to return fire with my M16. I could not go to my belt-fed 240 Bravo. If somebody came out with a pistol, I actually had to carry a pistol, an M16, and a belt-fed machine gun because I was mounted with a weapons platoon, so I was up on mounted patrols. But essentially, my rules of engagement were that the first 3 rounds on my magazine had to be tracer rounds. I had to have a little pin flare, zip tied to the front of my M16, and essentially if somebody was approaching, I had to pull out a little blaze orange flag, and I had to wave it and yell, "Agaf, agaf," and then if they continued to come closer, I would have to shoot the pin flare, either if it was a vehicle or, somebody walking or what have you. I had to shoot the pin flare either at the windshield or to the side of an individual. And then from there, I could start my my warning shots, if you will. I'd have to fire a tracer round to the oblique of the vehicle, then a tracer round to the grill of the vehicle, and then I could fire a tracer round as a kill shot to the driver. And if I didn't follow those rules of engagement, I could be brought up on charges.
That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous.
And that was in 2007. That was in 2007 when I was in Iraq, and so we had to go through those rules of engagement. So it as far as what happened with the Navy SEAL, the only thing I don't like about it is that basically the NCMJ basically found these guys guilty of war crimes, and essentially, President Trump sidestepped those and basically said, "I don't care," and basically, gave them a pardon. I don't know how that's going to affect the military as a whole, as far as their judicial process, because essentially, the military has their own judicial process, and then there's the civilian world. And unfortunately, I think sidestepping the military judicial system probably wasn't a good thing.
Well, what about the way the Pentagon treated that traitor called Bird Dog? I mean, I didn't hear them protesting that.
Yeah,
that guy got invited to the White House.
That guy absolutely needs to be in jail. I mean, he actually cost the lives of Americans, whereas, these other guys actually killed, insurgents, if you will. But I absolutely think that guy and the other one, Chelsea, whatever,
Manning.
Those two should be behind bars. Manning, absolutely. They should be behind bars, 100%.
Now, the rules
so I figure if they walk free, these other guys should walk free.
Say again?
I figure if they walk free and they were traitors, these other guys, I mean, there's some controversy about what they did, but they were in a battle situation, I believe. And these other guys were traitors, and they got to walk free. Some even got invited to the White House.
Yeah, for instance, the one, like I said, I forget his name. I actually try to put it out of my mind, but from my understanding, what happened is that one of the men that he killed was actually sedated, was actually laying down, and from my understanding, he pulled out a hunting knife and just stabbed the dude to death, which, that's, to me, that's not cool. I mean,
I thought he was acquitted of that. I thought he was acquitted of that and was just only charged with posing with a dead body.
Yeah, I don't know. As far as I know, he was acquitted of the whole thing. That's what got him out, right?
Yeah. There was someone else came forward. Someone else came forward and saying, no, Gallagher did not stab him. I'm the one that stabbed him. When it came to the trial, someone else owned up to doing the actual stabbing.
Yeah.
So I think that's what got him off of
There's
that.
so much controversy.
Yeah, but, we see...
Yeah, who knows? Like I said, I have to go back and...
Well, what we see with these rules of engagement, and, you took back Iraq, you started to help them rebuild their country, and then Obama says, we withdraw everything, and now it's back to square one. And it's got to be very, very disheartening to see that everything that you and your guys laid down your life and blood for is now all undone. And now you have Iran coming into Iraq, trying to rule Iraq under Iran, and when we turn around and say, no, you're not going to do that, we're the bad guys. So now we've got the sanctions on Iran, you've got the uprising in Iran, and when it came for Congress to put out a resolution condemning Iran for shooting down the Ukrainian airliner, our Congress would not do it. Would you be willing to work with people to have a resolution to do that, to support the citizens of Iran in an uprising with sanctions?
I mean, right now it's the only thing we can do. We knew we were going into Iraq, and to be honest with you, right now I don't know, if going into Iraq was even worth it. We should have just kept Saddam Hussein in charge. At least he was controlling what was going on in Iran or in Iraq. But unfortunately, with him out of there, we knew it was going to create a vacuum. And that's where ISIS and everybody else came in there. Unfortunately, right now, I mean, America can't continue to fight all these people on their turf. At what point do we say enough is enough? If we're going to fight a war, and this is where I stand, you need to take the gloves off. If you're going to put us in the harm's way, we need to stop fighting these political wars where, don't be too bloody because we don't want the media in there to make us look like we're slaughtering these people. But at the same time, war is hell. War is hell. And once again, when you have these individuals who are sitting in these congressional seats who have never been in a fist fight, who wouldn't break a grape in a food fight, saying, oh, yeah, this sounds good, raw, 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 but yet they've never even put their self on the line. We need to stop playing these games. There is no enemy on the face of this earth that could withstand the full grunt of the military force. I guarantee if Iran really wanted to get after us, we could take care of them in a weekend. China might be the hardest because they got 1 billion people and a ton of money. But other than that, when it comes to force on force, there's nobody else out there that can withstand what we can implement if our hands are untied. Like I said, this 12-year war in Iraq and 13-year war in Afghanistan, come on. The problem is we can't change the ideology of these people, and at the end of the day, unfortunately, we can't continue to sit there and try to force them to believe that what America has is good, because they've been founded on two different ideologies.
Yeah.
Well, you got
Jeremy, I see something similar. That's going on in the military, going on in law enforcement. You know, they have their hands tied behind them. I mean, I think it was last year where I saw citizens throwing water bottles at the police and bottles and cans, and the police didn't do anything because they're afraid of being, charged with police brutality or whatever. What can we do about that?
That's the biggest thing too right now. I thought about it today. I said, you know what? If law enforcement officers have to wear body cams, to be accountable, shouldn't politicians? Why shouldn't politicians? Everything that these politicians say should be recorded, so they can be held accountable. I despise politicians, by the way. I think I said that earlier. But the thing about it is that at the end of the day, with the whole Kaepernick and the kneeling and all that stuff, I believe, yes, there's police brutality. Yes, I understand things happen. We're human. You've got imperfect humans in an imperfect world trying to enforce laws that don't take into account human error. But at the same time, people want to direct their anger and their frustration towards law enforcement personnel. But at the end of the day, law enforcement personnel do not write the laws in which the law enforcement officers are enforcing. So if people have problems with the law, they need to go talk to the politicians, the lawmakers, who are instigating these laws, and not take it on the law enforcement officers. They're just trying to do their job and get home to their families. And unfortunately, once again, you have individuals who have never walked a mile in these law enforcement officers' shoes. One instance, they're walking into a potential, bad situation with a domestic violence call. Next thing you know, they might be saving a kid from drowning. Then they want to have lunch. And afterwards, they got to go to a murder scene because somebody decided to put their kid in a microwave. It's like these are the people, they see the worst of humanity every single day, but yet those who are complaining about law enforcement officers aren't willing to step up to the plate and enlist and serve. Go on right along. See what these law enforcement officers have to go through on a daily basis before they start casting stones.
Believe it or not, I still have all my memo books, and my listeners know my first footpost directly out of the police academy was the building that Frank Serpico was shot in, and for 10 years that was my command. That was still a burned-out, drug-infested hellhole. But you're right. They don't know what we see, and then when we go home, you got to just pretend nothing happened and get on with your life and take care of your family. Who do you have to talk to? And right now, law enforcement has a rising rate of suicides, too. It's starting to come almost on par to the military. Military has 21 a day. Now you throw in law enforcement, it becomes a phenomenal number per day. And the stress we're being placed under because of rules of engagement, of social engineering, it's going to take the best of us, and you're going to be left with the bottom of the dregs being your military and your law enforcement, because no one will want to do it anymore. People like you and Pat Tillman
absolutely,
that want to go out there and serve their country will say, what for? Why?
Absolutely. I actually signed up 3 different times, and I thank God that I never got chosen to be law enforcement because I don't know. I definitely don't think I would be able to take it. With especially the scrutiny that law enforcement. They're not all bad. You might have a 1%er in there, but of course we had 10%ers in the military. We all know who they were. People are just bad. I mean, you got doctors, who you look up to and you think, oh, this is the creme de la creme when it comes to people who are scoundrels as well. Unfortunately, we live in a society where we try to put a little too much emphasis on imperfect people. And for you and I and everybody else out there who are believers, if our hearts aren't changed and focus upon who the Lord is, the flesh will take over, and we'll do things that will embarrass us, or we'll do things that we're not happy about. And it's sad that, especially today with our law enforcement officers, men and women out there every single day, waking up, walking out their doors, kissing their family goodbye, not knowing what's going to happen, what they're going to encounter when you've got mental illness, you got drug abuse, you got all these issues that are happening in today's society, and they're getting worse. They're being amplified because of the fact that Americans no longer have to be accountable for their actions because somebody's going to pick up the pieces for them, somebody's going to give them some sort of benefit, somebody's going to enable them to go out and be an individual who is not contributing to the success and the greatness of our society. And that's what's really sad. And usually these are the people who are trying to win a public seat, a vote.
Exactly. You know, as you said, with law enforcement, it's only 1%. That 1%, that one person out of 100 is enough to put a smear on every last officer's name. And I know for the 10 years I worked in my command, there were 3 people. And we had, at any point in time, 235 officers. 3 people in those 10 years that were found guilty of some sort of a criminal act. That's a very low number. But the fact that those people stained our reputation, and every time we took a step out into the street, we had to answer for their actions. Not our own actions, but their actions. And I know 2 of them that went to jail for what they did.
Well, and absolutely, and that's one of the things, you know, I'm watching this series on Aaron Hernandez, you know, as a football player, as a professional football player, actually on a team, any team, you know, especially when you're in the public eye, whether it's law enforcement or a local team or what have you, everybody preaches the fact that, hey, don't do anything that's going to bring negative attention to our organization. Everybody knows that. You know, but yet you still have those 1%ers or those 2%ers that go out there and create selfish acts because of whatever reason, you know, they want to be made or they want to be feared or what have you, and they go out and they do these stupid things, and then they want to turn around and say, oh, it wasn't my fault, it was somebody else, you know, the devil made me do it or whatever. You know, but at the end of the day, it's like, no, you were told over and over and over, don't do this, especially in the NFL. You know, every season, every week, hey, don't go do this, don't go beat your wife, don't drink and drive, don't do this, here's a number to call, if you need a ride, here's a call. Same thing in the Marine Corps, you know, don't do this, don't do that. If you need a ride, call duty, the guy on duty. You know, all these things. But yet we still have individuals in these situations that go out and make poor choices and bring a bad reputation to those of us who are trying to do the right thing.
It is a shame. It is a shame. To move on, because you are a very religious man, and we've had attacks on our faith. Whether you're a Jewish or Christian, we are under a huge amount of pressure and attacks. We've had a rise in anti-Semitism in the United States. Trump is starting to put in programs to help protect religious freedom. But still, you have a segment of our society that is, again, not even 10% of our society, far less than that, the LGBT community, still putting their demands on everyone else. Would you be there's an ERA amendment that's been going around since the 1920s that they're trying to revise, and I've read it, and my state senator, you know, had asked me about it, and I tore it apart because it says you have equal rights based upon your sex, but using today's definition of gender fluidity, sex could be anything. So would you be in support of an ERA amendment like this, or would you be in support of policies that Trump is putting in to help protect religious freedom no matter who you are?
I'm a simple man. You know, I'm a nuts and bolts kind of guy. You know, and it's like, if we're going to use standards on, you know, scientific facts for climate change and all this stuff, why are we not using that same facts when it comes to male and female? You know, that's the thing that's crazy to me. And I actually had these conversations with one of my students who was actually a Marine, who was actually gay, and we had this conversation, and I explained to him, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, there are only 2 sexes, male and female. Now, you can be somewhere in the middle, but at the end of the day, the body was only designed a certain way. And he started talking about other things, and I said, listen, I did the research on this, and I said, the homosexual community was hit with AIDS back in the 80s and early 90s heavily, and it was very hard. And I said, do you understand why that was? And he said, well, yeah, because they weren't practicing safe sex. I said, no, it's because the anatomy of the body wasn't created for that kind of trauma. I said, if you look at the lining of the rectal wall, it's a lot thinner than the vaginal wall. It's not designed for that such force or stresses or impact. And I said, what happens is it starts to tear in there, and it starts to bleed, and then when the male subject or whatever, ejaculates in there, you have a direct access. Basically, you have direct fluid to fluid contact, blood, semen to blood, and that's why the AIDS epidemic hit the homosexual community so hard. I said it had nothing to do with safe sex. It has to do that you're doing something that's not conducive for the human body. And it's the same thing here. It's like I have students that come in all the time that want to argue the fact that they're a better worker than somebody else because, they feel that they're this way or the other. I said, listen, we have to get back to the facts over feelings. We have to get back and actually do the research and stop going, well, I feel this way, so this is the way it must be. No, facts are facts, and we need to get back to that.
And you have to question why in the LGBTQ community they have the highest rate of suicide, drug and alcohol addiction, sexual abuse, depression. It's far higher than the average person in society. So there has to be something there about mental stability. In the 50s, when they first came out with the sex change process, you had to go through a battery of psychiatric examinations. And then 1% of those may be found to be legitimate gender dysphoria. 1% out of all those people. That says a lot about if you're pressing a social agenda or if you're trying to help someone genuinely.
Well, absolutely. And that's one of the things, too, that it's mind-boggling to me. I came under fire. I was a shot put discus hammer guy. I was actually pretty dang good when I was 18, 19. I was actually a national champion. I actually still own a bunch of school records for my efforts. And, as a discus thrower, especially on the collegiate level, I actually missed going to the Olympic trials by about a foot one year. And, we throw a 2K implement where the women threw like a 1.4, and which is, I think it's about 3 pound difference, I believe. I have to go back and look at it again. But anyways, as far as even the shot put, men throw a 16-pounder, and women, I believe, threw an 8-pounder. And then you look at the world records between the two, which is somewhere around 82 feet. Yeah, the men's record is somewhere like 82 feet, 10 inches. The women's record is like 81 feet or something, somewhere around there. But the fact of the matter is that the implement they're throwing is half as much as the one, because men have a different body structure. And what really upsets me is when I see these MMA fighters, these transgenders who are going into the ring, and they're just beating the snot out of these women. And it's like, well, no crap, because biologically their hands, their bone density is bigger, muscle mass. Of course, when they lay a right, it's going to hurt a lot more than when that female MMA fighter lands a right. It's two different worlds, but yet people are going, well, that's how he feels. Okay, well, I think this whole movement has set the women liberation movement back 100 years.
Precisely. And there's a real cost to this, because legitimate girls coming out of school looking for that scholarship, that sports scholarship, whether or not they surpass themselves in track and field or gymnastics, but because now men are infiltrating it, claiming to be women, again, the physiology would make that man over. We had the instance in Texas with the wrestler. He's won 2 championships in a row because he claims he's a she. And biologically, I'm sorry, when you're dead and buried and in the grave and they pull you up 500 years from now and they run a DNA test and they look at your pelvis, they're saying, that's a man, that's a woman. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it.
Yep.
The military did a study with women in the field. The body muscle that is destroyed and burned when they're carrying those rucksacks burns at a different rate than a man. They don't have, I'm sorry, ladies, I've competed against men in the police department, and I know the women can do certain things, men can do certain things. And if you don't work as a team, you're not going to succeed anyway. But there is a definite physiological difference. When a woman approaches a call for a domestic...
For me...
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. When she comes, I like that when she takes a call.
If a woman answers a domestic violence call, women will behave differently in the domestic violence. We find that when 2 men show up, it becomes more aggressive. 2 women show up, they have a greater chance of having it diffused. And I've worked with female partners and I've worked with male partners. And after a while, they got to see how I handled situations. They were able to work with me in tandem, which is a beauty about the military. But you still have to recognize the physical differences and tailor the jobs to meet the person's skill. Yes, there's going to be some women that are outstanding and maybe can compete one-on-one with the man, and they're rare, and I won't hold them back. If they can do it and they can pass everything, go for it, girls. But if you can't, step back, admit it, and don't demand an equal right you don't deserve because you can't do the task.
And the thing that worries me is it's really disheartening to me is like here you have this young man who is in there, defeating these women for these state championships. What about that title? 20 years down the road, and she's talking to her grandkids or what have you, and she's going, unfortunately, I was the best in the state, but I'll never have that title now, and never the opportunities that might have come with that title. It's the same thing with Lance Armstrong. I think about Lance Armstrong and all the doping and cheating that he did, and I think, my God, there might have been a guy that was third or fourth place who was doing it all natural, doing it the best he could, and yet he was robbed because Lance Armstrong wanted to cheat. Same thing with this whole thing about these transgender athletes going in there. They're taking an opportunity away from these women who have 100% the biological, background as being female athletes, and yet that opportunity has been robbed from them because somebody felt like, I just felt like being a girl today. And a lot of that, to me, I honestly believe, has to do with some sort of trauma that happened early on in those kids' lives, whether it was sexual abuse or they got heartbroken in a relationship and they decided to go ahead and fall into that trap, which to me is a trap of, sin and pride and all that kind of stuff that comes involved with that.
And as you said, the opportunities that lost, and not just for scholarships or for grants, but what about sponsors, advertisers, income that could be made that are now forever denied that individual because someone felt that he was more of a she than she is actually she.
And it goes on. It will we get into it. Unfortunately, and this is just the way our society is, and I wish it was different. But male athletes, male sports are going to get a little bit more attention than the female side, and that's just the way it is in our society. I remember when I think it's great that women want to be out there, but unfortunately, they're not going to create the revenue stream that male athletes create. And I remember back when I was in college, the women, the WNBA came out, and they were kind of complaining about some of the same things that the soccer players have complained about last year, was equal pay. And I kept saying, well, listen, I think it's great that these women are out there, but if they're not creating the revenue stream that the men's sports are, and they're just starting out, so it's going to take some time. I said, but not only that, but, when I watch basketball, I don't want to watch 60 minutes of a bunch of layups. I mean, what people turn on the TV is when somebody's doing, a behind-the-head 360 slam dunk. That's what gets viewers to watch. And I remember watching the WNBA, and I was kind of like, man, this is just 60 minutes of layups. This is kind of boring. I don't want to watch this. I want to see what Michael Jordan's doing. Oh, my God, did you see what he did? It's like, that's exciting. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that in women's sports. And that's just very unfortunate, just the way it is. But at the end of the day, are they trying their best? Absolutely. But as far as trying to, compete with the men, it's probably never going to be there. I mean, even in track and field, you've got, the difference in the world records and the 100-yard dasher, it's only a couple of seconds, but in a couple of seconds of track and field, it might as well be a couple of hours.
Yeah. Well, it's a meritocracy, not an equalocracy. Oh, Jerry, Curtis is going to be calling in for our next guest, so we have a few minutes left, and I'm dying to see when you do get the new website up to have listing of your stances on various views, because you already mentioned entitlements for non-citizens that they shouldn't be getting. We also have where Social Security is consistently being called an entitlement. And I'm sorry, I spent a lifetime paying into it, and I was promised that the government would take the money they took from me and return it to me without interest. If I had placed it in my own investment account, I'd probably be sitting back here a millionaire, not worrying about, the next check coming in from Social Security. But yet Social Security has abused it and given Social Security supplemental income to people that do not deserve it, had never earned it, and yet our money is being redistributed. Would you then, for instances of Social Security supplemental income, see that rescinded or have some sort of work requirement to it, drug testing requirement to it, along with welfare, food stamps, and Section 8 housing, and down the road, and the Obozo care phones that we all involuntarily pay for on our cable bill, our phone bill, our internet bill? See a lot of that stuff go away.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think where the problem exists is, once again, I'm going to turn it back on the politician. I feel that the politician should get their retirement through Social Security. And also, when they leave office, when their tenure is done, or when their time is up, which I also believe in term limits, that whatever's left in their little war chest needs to be donated back to Social Security as well. Why do we continue to allow these politicians to be celebrities? They're servants of the people. And I honestly believe that they're retired. If they can't invest $175,000 or $225,000 a year wisely, why the heck should they get some government incentivized retirement? They can go out and speak and run and probably make a great living being a keynote speaker, making $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a speech.
Well, we need new fresh blood. We need veterans in Congress. And I'm seeing that now with the change in an uplifting of the morale of our military coming out, I think we're going to see a lot more men and women like yourself willing to stand up and continue to serve.
I hope so. We need them.
We've got combat vets out there for Congress, and we've got a couple other organizations coming in, and hopefully we'll start to take this nation back the way our founding fathers wanted to see it. But I'm going to check with Curtis if he comes back in the line to find out what happened to our upcoming guest. But people can find you at statforcongress.com. And are you having any places that people can go and meet you and see you speak and get to talk to you one-on-one?
Yeah, absolutely. With the new website, we're going to have scheduled events on it coming up. Our primary is in March 3rd, so I've got about 5 more weeks, or about 6 more weeks of this, and then we'll have, hopefully, with the jungle primaries here in California, I'll be in the top 2. But yeah, people can go, and once again, if I don't make it March 3rd, then there will be other events that I'm going to be going to across the country for veteran advocacy and stuff of that nature. But right now, the biggest thing is just trying to get in the top 2 in this primary, and hopefully, God willing, a seat in Congress.
Oh, from your lips to God's ears, and I wish you good luck and God bless for all the hard work you're doing for the veterans and for your run for Congress, and thank you for your service. And oh, by the way, I have been a lifelong Green Bay Packer fan.
Oh, I won't hold that against you. I won't hold that against you.
Thank
you guys for having me on the show.
Well, I just may finally watch a football game after my 2-year boycott after Kaepernick kneeling down. So I think I'm going to have to watch the Super Bowl and cheer my team.
I haven't watched football in a long time, but yeah, it's going to be a great weekend this weekend of football. I might catch a couple of games maybe, but we'll see.
Well, Jeremy, I wish you good luck on that one, and God bless, sir.
Thank you. God bless, and Semper Fidelis.
All right. Jeremy Staat, check out his website, Staat, S-T-A-A-T, statforcongress.com. We're going to figure out what Curtis is doing with our next guest. Looks like he's having a little bit of a problem getting him on. So once again, you're here listening to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, Facebook. Just go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. While we figure out what's going on with our next guest, I'm going to play our little bit of our commercial here and tell you guys I actually do. Oh, looks like he does have their guest in. All right, so we'll avoid the commercial. All right. Welcome aboard to Lou Pepper, the author of In the Cauldron, Terror, Tension, and the American Ambassador's Struggle to Avoid Pearl Harbor. I mean, the guys over at Regenary Press always send me a bunch of questions to ask, and I only look at them after I've read the book, and I've made my own list of questions. And true story, I've got 2 handwritten pages of about 38 different notes. So I don't think we're going to have enough time to discuss the whole entire book. But it is a book discussing the events leading up to Pearl Harbor. And you point out in certain areas where personalities conflicted, where policies conflicted, which led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Based upon your book, do you honestly think that Pearl Harbor could have been avoided, or was it just very simply inevitable? It was a clash of 2 different worlds.
Well, it was certainly a clash of 2 different worlds, but I don't think it was inevitable. But I think more importantly, this is a story about Joseph Grew, who was America's ambassador to Japan in the months before Pearl Harbor. And he believed that there was a chance to avoid Pearl Harbor and war with Japan. There was no guarantees in this business, but he did believe that. And he clung to that belief before Pearl Harbor happened, that war could have been avoided, and he maintained that belief after it happened.
Now, in the beginning of the book, you give out a list of names, and I'm not even going to try, and I'm going to mess up the Japanese names like all heck. But why did you center on Grew and not on Cordell Hull or Stanley Hornback or Henry Stimson or the other one, Dudman? There was Summer Wells. There was a lot of other interesting people, but why did you center on Grew alone?
Well, those other characters you mentioned are certainly prominent players in this drama, but the reason I focused on Joseph Grew is because he is the center of this drama, and it's his story, and his story is largely untold. There are a lot of books about Pearl Harbor, as you can imagine. They talk about Secretary of State Cordell Hull. They talk about those other characters you mentioned. But Joseph Grew was a principal character here, and he was the one who was in Japan, and he knew the Japanese. He was talking to the Japanese. He also was a classmate of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He knew all the other players, and it was his effort to try to orchestrate an agreement that is this focus of the story. And when those efforts failed, it's his story too. He tried to warn the United States, President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Cordell Hull, about the war was coming. In November 1941, only a few weeks before Pearl Harbor, he sent 2 telegrams to Secretary of State Cordell Hull, warning him that Japan was prepared to launch a suicidal war against the United States, and that armed conflict could come with dangerous and dramatic suddenness.
Well, before we get too far into Cordell Hull's personality and background, which is very, very interesting. I love the story about the cave. But prior to us getting into a conflict with Japan, as early as 1925, there was an article in the London Daily Telegraph detailing how Japan could attack us at Pearl Harbor. 1925, before anyone even thought about this.
Actually, it was the correspondent for that newspaper who wrote a book about an attack on Pearl Harbor. So your reference is basically right, but it was that correspondent, Bywater was his name.
Yeah, you're correct.
He wrote a book about...
It was in the Times Review, yeah.
He wrote a book about... Yeah, so he wrote a book in 1925 about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, and there was a front page New York review in the New York Times Sunday Book Review section about that book. And one of the people who was in Washington and could have read that book review was a guy named Yamamoto, and he was a military attaché in Japan's embassy in the United States. And Yamamoto, who could have read that review of that book, he is the one who planned the Pearl Harbor attack. And so there's some irony there.
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't doubt if he didn't. I would say he probably has. But getting to the personality of Gru, he was from an aristocratic background by American standards. And there was interaction between the Roosevelt family and his family. So it was like one big happy old boys club there. But he was someone that decided he wanted adventure. He wanted excitement rather than sitting behind some stodgy desk. So he was pretty much an adventurous individual.
No question. So he was an adventurous guy. After he graduated from Harvard, he took an 18-month trip around the world. And a large part of that trip was in hunting. And one of the things that he did, as a recent college graduate, he hunted a tiger in China, of all places. And he ultimately shot a tiger. And ironically, his shooting of that tiger led to his diplomatic career, because when President Theodore Roosevelt heard about Gru's success in hunting down a tiger, President Theodore Roosevelt decided that was the kind of person he wanted in the United States diplomatic corps. And so he gave Gru his first diplomatic appointment after hearing about the story of this young college graduate shooting a tiger in China. And years later, Gru would say, when he was a retired Foreign Service officer, and he would talk to people who were applying to become Foreign Service officers in the United States State Department, he would say, you young people, all you have to do is fill out answer some questions on an exam to get into the Foreign Service. I had to shoot a tiger.
Yeah, I like that one. But when we trace the problems we have with Germany and Japan, it traces directly back to World War II. And it was two World War II treaties were never ratified, the Versailles and Lausanne Conference. And because this never was done, it left us wide open to other conferences and other treaty negotiations that sort of backfired on us.
Well, that's true. The Versailles Treaty, you're talking about the Versailles Treaty in particular, that was supposed to end and did end World War I. And obviously the Versailles Treaty imposed some severe sanctions on Germany, which I think contributed to Hitler's rise. But also the Versailles Treaty contributed to Japan's conflict with the United States, because Japan had been on the same side of as the United States in World War I. Japan had fought against Germany, or contributed to fighting against Germany in World War I, and they wanted to be accepted as a world power after World War I was over. And one of the ways in which they wanted to do that, they wanted the Versailles Treaty to recognize that there would be no discrimination based on race. And there was a lot of racial discrimination and prejudice against Japan and other Asian peoples. And the United States would not support Japan's proposal for a prohibition against racial discrimination and equality. And that, among other factors like that, or actions like that, contributed to Japanese resentment of Americans. And I think that contributed to some extent to the ill feeling that existed between the two countries.
Well, unless I missed it in the book, because some sections I had to speed read to make sure I had everything read before today, I didn't see a reference directly to the American Immigration Act, I believe it was 1920, that limited immigration specifically from the Asian countries.
No, well, I can understand why you raced through it, and there's a lot of detail there. But yes, it's the Immigration Act of 1924, and that reference. There are a number of references to that act in the book, in part because, again, going back to what I said, in Japan there was a lot of resentment toward that act because it prohibited Japanese and Asian immigration into the United States, and Japanese took that as a sign that the United States was not prepared to accept Japan as an equal. And one of the ironies is when Japan and the United States started talking about a possible agreement in 1941, and the Japanese representatives came to talk with the Secretary of State Cordell Hull in Washington, D.C., and they mentioned that Immigration Act of 1924. And Cordell Hull, who had been Secretary of State since 1933, and he said to the Japanese representatives, well, that was one of my goals when I first came to the State Department, was to change that law, and you just have to be patient with me. And, of course, the Japanese representatives, I'm sure, were not patient because he had been in office now for 8 years when he said that, and nothing had been done to change that law, at least by then.
Well, what I find, fascinating is that trying to communicate in English and then having it translated into Japanese and vice versa. Japanese is a highly complex language, and one sentence can be translated in easily 5 different ways. And we recently saw that in a visit was it under Obama, where a sentence was not translated properly and a completely different outcome came. So in these negotiations, all these years, starting from the aftermath of World War I forward, there was always nuances that were there that sometimes were not recognized by our side.
Absolutely. Japanese is one of the most, this was mentioned in the book by people who were in the American Embassy in Tokyo. Japanese is probably one of the most difficult of the languages in advanced countries because it has like thousands of characters, and it's very difficult for foreigners to pick up the nuances, as you say, of the language. And later, Japanese diplomats did complain after the war when they read accounts of the Americans' translation and interpretation of intercepted Japanese messages. They would say that the American translators misunderstood or misread or mistranslated a lot of the Japanese cables and attributed to the Japanese sinister motives which were not intended by the cables. And so there was that problem of not being able to correctly understand the Japanese language.
Yeah, it's fascinating read in the book being called In the Cauldron, Terror, Tension, and the American Ambassadors Struggle to Avoid Pearl Harbor. But going back to the 2 non-ratified by the U.S. treaties, they went into secondary negotiations and ended up coming up with the 5-power treaty, and later on the London Conference, where we had 5-5-3 ratio, and then later on 10-10-7. So no matter what we did, there was a disparity in what we were allowing Japan to build compared to our armaments that we were building.
No question, but from the United States perspective, the United States and Great Britain were given a higher priority. No, I won't say priority. They were just given an option to build more ships. And again, just for your listeners, these treaties were made in 1922 and 1930, and were intended to limit the capacity of countries and their military capabilities, and hopefully limit the prospect of war among countries. And the United States and Great Britain, but the United States in particular, did not want to have parity with Japan because the United States, so the reasoning went, had to operate in 2 oceans, in the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and the Japanese, so the thinking went, only operated in the Pacific Ocean. So they said because the United States and Great Britain as well operated in 2 oceans and the Japanese only operated in 1, that was the reasoning, correctly or not, that they gave for limiting the Japanese to a greater extent than the United States or Great Britain.
Well, between the immigration policy, trade policy, and now military building, the ratio, in comes a gentleman named Stimson. Who was Stimson, and what is his doctrine?
Well, Stimson was actually a colonel, actually. Stimson Henry Stimson was the Secretary of State under Herbert Hoover. And what happened was, in 1931, while Herbert Hoover was still president and Stimson was Secretary of State, Japan went into Manchuria and took over Manchuria. And so by March of 1932, Japan had established a puppet regime in Manchuria. And Stimson was very angry about that, and he did not want the United States, or the world for that matter, to recognize this puppet regime that Japan had established in Manchuria. And he was hoping that the United States might take actually military action to oust the Japanese from Manchuria. But neither President Hoover nor the other countries like Great Britain or France were prepared to take any military action against Japan. So Stimson wrote these notes, as they're called, in which he said that the United States would never recognize a country, the puppet regime in Manchuria, because it was not based on self-determination, but reflected the Japanese military action against Japan. And so this became known as the Stimson Doctrine, which is that the United States would not recognize the puppet regime in Manchuria or any other puppet regime where a country like Japan had established a government under its control that was not based on the self-determination of the people of that country.
Now, Grew and his wife were traveling on the train, heading to the boat to come and become ambassador. And at that point, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this prime minister's name. There was an assassination of the prime minister and a threat to, above all people, Charlie Chan. There were two factions in Japan, one military nationalistic that wants to conquer, and the other was out to seek peace. They were warring, and for some reason they thought that assassinating Charlie Chan would help their cause. No, not Charlie Chan, Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, I apologize.
Charlie Chaplin. Well, I think they thought because although they thought that he was a great American movie star, and they thought, well, even though he was British, but even though they thought because he was an American movie star, and he was so well known all around the world, they thought by assassinating Charlie Chaplin, it would result in the United States and Japan going to war against each other. They also contemplated assassinating Joseph Grew, who at the same time was on his way over to Japan to assume his role as America's ambassador to Japan. But you're right. There was factions within Japan who really disliked the United States and thought that Japan's destiny required that they become involved in armed conflict with the United States. And that there were those people in Japan who had maintained those beliefs up until the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Well, it's funny because we have a clash of cultures, and now the Grews, Ambassador Grew and his wife, are now in Tokyo, and they're setting up house. She finds this beautiful ornamental bowl, and they're giving house parties, welcoming in other diplomats, other dignitaries into the house, and one staff member kept on taking the bowl away and disappearing with it. And she started to finally go head-to-head, and I thought that story was so amusing. But the little nuances in Japanese society, something that here to us would have been funny, we would have thought an amusing piece to leave after to be a conversation piece, was something that Japanese society said, you don't do this.
Yeah, well, just to fill for your listeners, what happened was that Grew's wife, Alice, saw this bowl, this vase, and she bought it at the market, and she loved it so much the way it looked, she put it in the foyer of the ambassador's residence, which is this luxurious home in Tokyo. And she put it in the foyer, and she came down in the morning, and it wasn't there. And she asked the butler where it was, and he said he put it in the pantry. And she told him to put it back, and he did. And then the next day she came down, and it was gone again. And she said, where is it? And he said, it's in the pantry. And she berated him for disregarding her instructions. And he then explained to her that the writing on the vase made it clear that this vase was for a geisha house and was totally inappropriate for an American ambassador's residence. And that was all because Alice Grew, Joseph Grew's wife, did not speak Japanese, and she had no understanding or inkling of the connotation of that vase.
I could just imagine the merchants in the market when she picked the vase up, admired it, and paid for it and walked away. That in itself is like a TV movie scene, which in itself I think is hysterical.
Right.
Matter of fact, I heard that someone mentioned that this is a possibility. Someone may be farming it out for a movie.
From your lips to God's ears. I'm hoping so, but nothing definite yet. By the way, speaking of movies, for your listeners, they can go to my website. It's Lew Paper, Lewpaper, Lew Paper, Lewpaper, lewpaper.com. And if they go to that website, not only can they read more about the book and the reviews we've gotten about the book, but there is also a video about the book where you can see all the characters we're talking about. It's only about a 2-minute video, but it's a good overview for people who like some visual presentation of what we're talking about.
Well, on our show description page, all my guests, their websites are put up there with the introduction to them onto the show. So when people listen in the podcast, because I got a lot of people that click on it in the archives, as they're listening, they can look and read at it and click on it and go there as they're listening in. So I've got your link in there. What I found interesting...
Right, thank you.
No problem. What I found interesting is the character of Ambassador Grew. He was a very social individual, and he did a lot of what I call country club, what was the word I used? Country club diplomacy. And there was a comment about why everyone kept on asking him about his golf game, and I thought that was hysterical.
Right. Well, because he played a lot of golf. He loved golf. And he was, as tensions were rising right before Pearl Harbor, and he was at a diplomatic function, and he said to the French ambassador to Japan, he said, well, why is it that people are always asking me about my golf these days? And he said, well, Mr. Ambassador, your golf is a barometer of the amount of tension that we're facing and how serious the future looks, because if a week goes by and you haven't played golf, then that means we're in trouble.
Well, the quote is, if a week goes by without you playing golf, the fact is cabled to every chancellery in the world over, for the situation is then indeed critical. I thought that was absolutely hysterical.
Right, there you go.
Based upon just his golf game, he could change world policy. And imagine if he played bad golf. Oh, jeez.
Right.
Now, who was Hornbeck, and what was the importance of the Two-Face memo?
Well, Stanley Hornbeck was the political relations advisor for Secretary of State Cordell Hull. And he as Grew's principal aide said, because he had worked with this guy, Stanley Hornbeck. He worked in the State Department in Washington, D.C., and Grew's assistant, whose name was Gene Duman, said that Hornbeck had two great interests or passions. One was he loved China because he had gone to China when he was a young man and taught there and met a lot of people and had a great affection for the Chinese. And the other passion he had was he hated the Japanese because anybody who was in love or had enough deep affection for the Chinese usually hated the Japanese because the Japanese and the Chinese were bitter enemies. And so while he was in advising Secretary of State Cordell Hull, Hornbeck was always pushing policies and actions that would benefit the Chinese and that would lead the United States to take more and more aggressive action against the Japanese. And he had a very low regard for the Japanese. And in fact, in November 27, 1941, so we're talking about 10 days before Pearl Harbor, Hornbeck sent Secretary of State Cordell Hull, his boss, a memo in which he said the odds of the United States becoming involved with war with Japan in the next 3 months are very, very low. And he said that because the Japanese don't have the capability of doing harm to the United States. So that was one of the worst projections I guess you could make. And obviously he was a little off base.
Well, now, one of the problems Gru had was when he went over there was no clear instructions for him. On top of which, when he got over there was the Japanese government had a really weird structure where the Army and Navy were in one area, then you had the Diet, then you had the Emperor, and like, who do you communicate with and who do you negotiate with?
Well, Japan had a very convoluted system of government. Gene Duman, who was Gru's primary assistant, he was a counselor in the embassy, said that Japanese government was a two-headed monstrosity. And the reason that was they had an emperor, but he wasn't the kind of emperor who could issue decrees and just tell everybody what to do. He considered himself what he called a constitutional monarch, in which he just oversaw it and tried to implement decisions that were reached on a consensus basis. But you had the civilian government, which was not elected. It was appointed by the emperor, and they dealt with all the issues that a civilian government would deal with. But one of the things the civilian government did not have, they had no control over the military. And so the military, the Navy and the Army, they reported directly to the emperor, and the prime minister and his government had no control and really no involvement, generally speaking, on a broad scale in military matters. And so therefore, that's why you had this two-headed monstrosity. Unlike the United States, for example, where the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy, as well as the chief executive of the government. And so our president controls all aspects of government, including the armed forces. And that was not the case in Japan. And so that's why it was very difficult. So that made it difficult for Gru, as the ambassador, to pinpoint the locus of decision-making and where the power was and what was going on.
Well, now, when he got... Go ahead, Curtis. My co-host, Curtis.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if you knew what role the emperor played in the planning, or even just giving his wishes to the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Well, Hirohito was a young man, and Hirohito, I think, was genuinely interested in avoiding war with the United States. And I think he was genuinely interested in trying to work out a diplomatic solution with the United States. And so he was very much in favor of Japan conducting discussions with the United States and Secretary of State Cordell Hull in Washington to see if the two countries could reach an agreement. The problem was that Cordell Hull, for his part, really had no interest in reaching an agreement with Japan. He regarded Japan, Secretary of State Cordell Hull, regarded Japan as one of the worst international desperados in the history of mankind. And he subscribed to the view that no promises of the Japs, as he called them, on paper, would be worth anything. And so, but he was told, Hull was told by President Roosevelt and the United States military chiefs to drag the conversations out with the Japanese as long as possible, because the United States military capabilities were woefully inadequate. And so Roosevelt and the military chiefs told Hull they needed time because they were not prepared to engage in a conflict in the Pacific. And so that's what Hull did. And he spent untold hours talking with the Japanese representatives about an agreement he knew would never come to fruition. Well, by November of 1941, Joseph Gru, our ambassador, was reporting to Hull that the Japanese leaders were becoming very frustrated about the lack of progress in the discussions, and they were beginning to sense that the United States was not really interested in an agreement, and that the United States was merely playing for time, which in fact was the case. And so, although Hirohito was interested in reaching an agreement, by November of 1941, he became convinced by his military and civilian leaders that the United States was never going to enter into an agreement with Japan, which is probably right, and that they were, in the meantime, subject to these embargoes, and he was convinced that, persuaded that unless they did something, that they were going to be, they would have no choice. They would become a third-rate country, and so Hirohito went along with it reluctantly because he felt that was the only choice they had.
Well, now I'm looking through my notes, and I'm not even through page 1 yet, so I've got to move this a little bit along. Now, there was a rising faction within the Army where they thought that certain members of government were too soft, and there was an uprising where they came up with a manifesto, and they turned around and they murdered the Prime Minister right after he left Ambassador Gru's residence, and they were taking out leaders left and right. They presented a manifesto which was basically unclear.
Right.
And when they did arrest the assassins, no one ever paid the penalty. And it was really strange how people kept on switching in and out in the courtroom.
Well, actually, the leaders of that was in February 1936. And actually, the leaders of that uprising, these were people in the Japanese army who were frustrated because they felt that the United States, that Japan was being too soft and that Japan should take a harder line, although they never really clearly articulated their goals. Even that manifesto you're talking about was very vague. But the leaders of that, Hirohito was very, very upset when he found out that the members of the Japanese army had assassinated these Japanese leaders in the Japanese civilian government. And he finally did order that they be tried in secret. And I think my recollection is that 14 or 15 of them were executed for their participation in that uprising. But one consequence of that uprising was the Army decided, they changed the government a little bit so that when a prime minister was appointed and he needed a Navy minister and a war minister, the war minister was somebody from the Japanese Army, that each of those branches, the Army and Navy respectively of the Japanese government, they could veto a prime minister selection of a war minister or a Navy minister. And in effect, that gave the Army and the Navy veto power over the formation of a government. And so that gave them considerable control over who is going to be in the government and what policies that government was going to pursue.
Now, we've got Germany marching through Europe, and Japan is watching this. And in 1937, they did their march through China. And then there was the USS Penne incident, and then followed by the rape of Nanking. These incidents, especially with the attack on our vessel, which was identified to them, and then the slaughter of the soldiers as they were trying to flee, not the soldiers, the sailors, it brought around finally a call from the United States to Roosevelt to employ sanctions.
Well, that led to it, but I think there was a growing concern with Japan's policies and what you talked about, the rape of Nanking and China and all that. And I think by starting in 1938 and continuing onward, the United States kept progressively increasing the sanctions, economic sanctions, that were imposed on Japan. And ultimately, it led finally to a decree by President Roosevelt in July 1941, where he imposed a freeze on Japanese assets in the United States. And the practical effect of that meant that Japan couldn't buy anything, like especially oil, that they needed to maintain their military machine, unless they got a license from the United States and permission to withdraw funds that they had in the United States to pay for the oil and other exports. So this freeze, which was the ultimate progression of those sanctions, ultimately led to a total embargo in which Japan could not import oil or a lot of other products from the United States. And just to continue on, these sanctions that the United States had imposed by the fall of 1941, before Pearl Harbor. They had crippled the Japanese economy. So you had a situation where rice was being rationed. There was no gasoline for cars. The few cars that traversed Tokyo streets had to be fitted with a charcoal engine. They couldn't even get imported coffee. That had been replaced by another brew, about which the New York Times correspondent said it was better not to ask too many questions. So you had a country which was on the brink of economic collapse, and I think that, going back to your earlier question, I think that's where Japan decided that if we don't do something soon, we're going to become a third-rate power, and we're not going to be able to defend ourselves because we're not going to have any oil to run our ships or run our tanks or do whatever. And so I think that contributed greatly to the decision to finally attack Pearl Harbor.
Now, GRU always had a problem getting information from the United States. Hull was not someone that was really, open about everything going on. And in the fall of 1940, GRU got his first warning about an actual planned attack upon the Hawaiian Islands. And it wasn't from our government. It was from an ambassador from South America. And then there was questions about who knew what, who sent what telegram, who told who, and did anyone really pass the word on?
Right. Well, what happened, that was in January 1941. It was the Peruvian minister had heard from somebody on his staff who claimed to know somebody else who had access to secret information that in the event of trouble, Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor. And GRU did, as you say, he sent a telegram to Secretary of State Cordell Hull on January 27, 1941, conveying this rumor that Japan would attack Pearl Harbor in the event of any trouble or any conflict between the United States and Japan. But back in the United States, people gave it short shrift. They attached no credibility to that rumor whatsoever because people in the United States could not believe that Japan would actually attack the United States. Japan was so much smaller than the United States in terms of population and resources. People thought it would be utterly stupid for Japan to do that. But later, GRU tried to explain to Secretary of State Cordell Hull that Japan, they had this mindset, and he knew that a sense of desperation among the Japanese was going to lead to a sense of war, and as part of that samurai do-or-die spirit that still prevailed in Japan. And GRU tried to explain to Hull and Roosevelt that for Japanese leaders, annihilation through a suicidal war with the United States would be better than the humiliation of succumbing to American pressure. But, again, and he said it might seem foolhardy for Japan to do that. He said, but you cannot assess Japanese sanity by American standards of logic. He said the Japanese don't think the way we do. And he tried to explain that to Roosevelt and to Hull, but I don't think they took him at face value because, again, they just said to them it was just so stupid to think that Japan would attack the United States.
Well, now, all this is going on, and then there was a rise of a little-known guy called Matsuoka. Did I say that correctly? Probably not. Now, he was someone who spent a lot of time here in the United States. He experienced the racism against Asians here. And conversely, there was racism against the redheads, as we were known to the Japanese. So it was on both sides. But you got Hull on one side and you got Matsuoka on the other. And through this, Matsuoka was able to bring a more totalitarian regime into Japan, in so much as that there were thought police, re-education camps, and things like that going on.
No question. So Matsuoka, this was a guy who went to school. He was born in Japan, went to school in the United States. He got a law degree, actually, in Oregon. But he came back, and Gene Duman, who was GRU's principal advisor, said that there was beneath his veneer of sociability, he thought that Matsuoka had a real hatred for Americans. And when he became prime minister, in July 1940, he conveyed his view to an American correspondent. He said that the era of democracy is over, and totalitarianism is going to assume precedence and replace democracy. And he tried to introduce, as you say, policies and actions by the Japanese government that would push them toward that direction. The only thing I would say, though, is that in Japan did have a lot of the elements that appeared in Nazi Germany. You had secret police everywhere. Surveillance was pervasive. No dissent was allowed, so that an indiscreet word uttered to a friend, a neighbor, a family member, and a person could find themselves arrested, thrown in jail, and subject to horrific torture. And so what that meant was the Japanese leaders had complete control over the Japanese population. And although a lot of the people in Japan would have welcomed a reconciliation with the United States if they were disciplined people, and if the Japanese leaders issued a command to launch a suicidal war against the United States, the Japanese people were going to obey that command, and they would fight to the death.
And many of them did, even long after the war was over. But Matsuoka also was the one that traveled to Germany and the USSR. He got a neutrality agreement with Stalin, and Stalin had his own reasons for doing that. He made the agreement with Hitler in Germany. Now, he would be a highly comical character if it wasn't for the fact he was so dangerous. He was a very bellicose individual.
No question. It was very powerful. And going back to the question about where Hirohito stood, so by July of 1941, the other members of the Japanese cabinet, even the military advisors, wanted Matsuoka out of the cabinet because they wanted to avoid war with the United States, and they wanted to an adjustment of relations with the United States. And Matsuoka was very much against that, and he was making it difficult. And so they wanted him out of the cabinet. So in July 1941, they orchestrated a device. They had the whole cabinet resign, and then Hirohito, the emperor, asked the prime minister to reform a new government, and he did, and all the principal officers of the cabinet of the government were all the same except for the foreign minister. They replaced him. He was the foreign minister, and he was the only principal officer who was changed. And so the government, Hirohito, and the prime minister in July 1941, they thought when they got rid of Matsuoka that it would pave the way for better relations with the United States. But of course, it didn't, because, in a great part, because Secretary of State Cordell Hull back in the United States, as I said before, he was not really interested in having an agreement between the United States and Japan. He just thought it was virtually impossible. And so Matsuoka's departure really had almost no impact on Hull's perspective.
Well, you've got the intrigue going on over in Japan, but here in the United States, FDR's health was really bad. No one knew that he had gotten, 9 quarts of transfusions, massive transfusions, and he was bedridden for a while. Hull also, he had tuberculosis, and he would be not hospitalized, but he'd be in bed for weeks on end. So in this case, you had, what did I mention his name? Sewell. He is acting as undersecretary. Pardon? And there was an incident on the train at one point.
Wells, you mean? Sumner Wells?
I'm sorry?
Yeah. No, go ahead. You're talking about Sumner Wells now, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. Sumner Wells. I was seeing an S and I was seeing a W, right. And I was putting them together. I'm sorry, I'm a little dyslexic.
Yeah.
Sumner Wells. And as all this is going on, you got the secretary severely ill. You've got FDR severely ill. Sumner Wells is now stepping into the breach, and Hull and he do not get along. And then there's an incident on the train, and it becomes a national scandal.
Right. Yeah, what happened was that Sumner Welles, who was this very aristocratic guy whose family was close with President Roosevelt's family. In fact, Sumner Welles was a page at the wedding of Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, and he carried a train of Eleanor Roosevelt's wedding dress as she was walking down the aisle with her uncle, who was at the time President Theodore Roosevelt. But in this 1940 train ride you're talking about, it was September 1940, and Roosevelt had his cabinet and members of Congress and the press. They all took a train from Washington, D.C. to Alabama to attend a funeral of William Bankhead, who was the Speaker of the House, and he had died suddenly. So because he was Speaker of the House, they had all this entourage that went down there. And then on the train back, it was reported that Sumner Welles, who, as I say, was this very aristocratic guy, that around 5 o'clock in the morning, as the train was rumbling through Roanoke, Virginia, he reportedly asked one of the black porters to come to his compartment with some coffee. And when the porter did, it was reported that Welles offered this guy $20 to perform oral sex on Welles. And, of course, the reporter declined and then went back and he told the manager of the dining room manager on the train, and apparently a couple of other porters on the train were also asked to bring coffee to Sumner Welles' compartment on the train, and reportedly he made the same overture to them as well. And so when the people got back to Washington, the rumors started to fly. Ultimately, President Roosevelt asked J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI to conduct an investigation of the matter, and Hoover did conduct an investigation, although he never questioned Welles, and he never questioned the original porter who got the original offer because he had died. But there were rumors that Welles had made this overture, and of course, it didn't sit well in Washington. And ultimately, 1943 later, Welles was forced to resign because of it.
Oh, it is a fascinating book, and I wish you good luck in getting this made into a movie, because the details are so... It explains a lot from both sides, because as we were imposing the sanctions, Japan still needed, minerals, they still needed the oil, they still needed the manpower. So they go into northern Indochina, they're threatening the Dutch West Indies, we freeze the final assets, and at that point, the negotiations between Roosevelt and Admiral Nomura just completely break down. Japan is giving a deadline to the ambassador saying, if you don't do something by now, we're gonna go ahead. And it comes down to the bottom line. The day of Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt was ordering a telegram to be sent off. And up to the very last minute, we were trying to negotiate, buying time, and Japan was saying, we're going for it.
But that's one of the sad things about this story is, so here is Joseph Grew. And Joseph Grew tried to convey to Secretary of State Cordell Hull and President Roosevelt the kind of things they could do, the kind of communications that they could make that might get us beyond the brink. And all of his recommendations and advice was ignored. And so going back to your point, what you're talking about is the day before Pearl Harbor occurred, on December 6th, Roosevelt sent a telegram to Emperor Hirohito in Japan asking him to please withdraw all Japanese troops from Indochina, where Japan had put troops. And Grew had told Roosevelt and Hull and Welles months before that none of that would ever happen unless Japan had an agreement, that they couldn't, that there was a certain amount of pride that the Japanese had, and he said they were never going to withdraw troops unless there was some kind of agreement. So Grew could have, even before he sent the telegram, even before Roosevelt sent the telegram, if he had ever bothered to consult Grew about what he thought about it or what he should do, Grew could have said, this telegram is a fool's errand. It's never going to persuade Hirohito or the Japanese to do anything because you're just offering them assurances with no commitment of any kind that if they do something, maybe something will happen down the road that will be beneficial. And he said Japan's in a situation now where they're desperate, and just offering them assurances with no commitment is not going to advance the ball much. But that's one of the sad ironies of this story, is that things might, going back to your original question, could Pearl Harbor have been avoided? I don't know. But Bruce certainly felt that if President Roosevelt and Hull had consulted with him, or if they had listened to the advice he was given, that maybe there was a chance that war could have been avoided. And when he came back, as you know from reading the book, Grew was very bitter about what had happened because he felt the Roosevelt administration had squandered a chance to avoid war. And that's one of the sad conclusions that you see from reading this book.
Well, Lou,
and goes back to your original question about why I did this book, is because I wanted, it presents a fuller picture of what was going on before the Pearl Harbor attack.
Well, Lou, we're down to our last 4 minutes of the show. It has been so fast. Your book is In the Cauldron, Terror, Tension, and the American Ambassador's Struggle to Avoid Pearl Harbor. They can find it up on your website, which is LewPaper, LEWPAPER.com. I want to thank you for joining us, and I look forward to any future book you write.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all your time, and I appreciate all your questions. It shows you obviously gave it a very close reading, and I very much appreciate that. That's very gratifying.
Well, thank you very much. I try to do that to all my authors.
Well, you do a good job.
Thank you very much. Lou Pepper.
You did a great job.
Lou Paper, thank you. Good night and God bless. We're down to our last 3.5 minutes, Curtis. And we got, coming up, we've got your buddy Robinson up in North Carolina running for lieutenant. Yeah, thank you. Mark Robinson running for Lieutenant Governor in North Carolina. He's joining us next Friday. I've got Dr. Meg Meeker. She's got a new book out about raising our daughters in a toxic society. Very, very good book. I just started that, and I can't put that one down. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's a possibility that we have, oh, good Lord, McKee. Clarence McKee, yes. Boy, am I having major brain farts today. Yeah. So we've got ourselves... Right now, we're starting to book straight up through the end of this month, but we will be back here next Friday, same bat time, same bat station. Want to thank everyone that joined us over on Facebook Live, over here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media over on Spreaker, everywhere else that we are on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. Just go to the name of the show and catch us in the archives there. And I'll close out with our closing song by Gary Pecorella, Save America. Until then, I say good night and God bless.
I'm praying for this land I love, America, America, the home of the free. But there are people making plans to change America. They've no respect for her or what matters most to me. That's why I stand for the flag and I kneel at the cross. For the friends I have loved and lost, and I still God we trust, and the freedom our forefathers granted us.
90 seconds.
To save America. Do you hear our battle cry across America? We've got to rescue her. You know it's up to me and you to see the truth behind their lies. Don't change America. God bless
60
America
seconds.
and the red, white, and blue. That's the friends I have loved and lost, and I still believe in God we trust, and the thrill I forefathers granted us. I hope it's not too late to save America.
10 seconds.